There's no pain quite like watching your children struggle with something you cannot fix. For 7 long years, Margaret Hastings held her twin boys close, knowing all her wealth couldn't give them the one thing they needed most, the ability to walk. The doctors in Wyoming Territory said it was impossible. The town whispered their pity behind closed doors. Her sons, Samuel and Benjamin, would spend their lives in wheelchairs, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Then a mountain man named Caleb Stone arrived. He didn't bring medical degrees or fancy treatments. He brought something simpler, belief and a pair of steady hands. What happened next would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Hastings Ranch stretched across 3,000 acres of Wyoming Territory, where the land rolled like frozen waves beneath an endless sky. It was 1883, and the frontier still held its wild edge, though settlements like Cottonwood Creek were carving civilization out of the wilderness, one building at a time. The ranch house itself stood as a testament to prosperity. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wraparound porch that faced the distant mountains. Thomas Hastings had built it with his own hands, back when dreams seemed achievable and the future held nothing but promise. Margaret Hastings stood at the window of the front parlor, her hand resting against the cool glass. She was 34 years old, though grief had etched lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Her dark hair, once vibrant, was now streaked with premature silver that she no longer bothered to hide. She wore a simple dress of deep blue, practical and well-made, because what was the point of fancy clothes when there was no one left to notice? 3 years had passed since Thomas died. A riding accident, sudden and senseless. One moment he was the strongest man she'd ever known, and the next he was gone, leaving her alone with 2 boys who needed more than she knew how to give. "Mama, we're ready for the lesson." Margaret turned from the window to see her sons waiting by the large oak table that dominated the room. Samuel and Benjamin sat in their wheelchairs, the ones Thomas had crafted himself during the last months of his life. He'd known somehow that he wouldn't be there to carry them forever. The chairs were masterworks of carpentry, smooth wood worn to a polish by 7 years of use, wheels that turned silent and true, armrests carved with small animals that the boys loved to trace with their fingers. Samuel, older by 12 minutes, had his father's serious eyes and careful manner. He sat with a book already open in his lap, ready to begin. Benjamin, the younger twin, wore a smile that never quite faded, even though he had every reason to let it go. Where Samuel observed the world with quiet intensity, Benjamin met it with irrepressible curiosity. "I'm coming, my darlings." Margaret crossed the room, her footsteps soft on the woven rugs that covered the hardwood floors. She settled into the chair between them and picked up where they'd left off the day before, a history of the Roman Empire. Because the boys devoured knowledge the way other children devoured sweets. This was their life now. Lessons in the morning, reading in the afternoon, quiet evenings by the fire. The ranch ran itself more or less. The foreman, Jack Morrison, handled the cattle and the hands. Clara Murphy, the housekeeper who'd been with them since before the boys were born, managed the household. Margaret existed somewhere in between, going through the motions of living while feeling like a ghost in her own home. Clara appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a stout woman in her 50s, with grey hair pinned in a practical bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Hastings, Dr. Webb is here for the boys' monthly examination." Margaret felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Dr. Harrison Webb had been making these visits since the twins were born, and every time he left with the same pronouncement. Nothing had changed, nothing would change, and she should focus on keeping the boys comfortable rather than hoping for impossible things. Send him in. "Clara, thank you." Dr. Webb entered with his black medical bag and his expression of professional sympathy. He was a good man, Margaret knew, competent and kind. It wasn't his fault that medical science had no answers for her sons. He nodded to Margaret and smiled at the boys. "Good morning, Samuel. Benjamin, how are we feeling today?" "Fine, Dr. Webb," they answered in unison, then grinned at each other. They did that sometimes, speaking as one, moving in sync, as if being twins meant sharing a single soul, split between two bodies. The examination was always the same. Dr. Webb tested their reflexes, asked about pain or sensation, manipulated their legs with gentle, practiced movements. The boys bore it patiently, having learned long ago that resistance only prolonged the process. Margaret watched as she always did, searching for any flicker of hope in the doctor's face. She found none. "No change," Dr. Webb said quietly when he'd finished, pulling Margaret aside while the boys returned to their books. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I wish I had better news. Is there nothing else we can try? No specialist in Denver or San Francisco? I have the means to pay, whatever the cost." The doctor's expression softened with pity, which was somehow worse than outright dismissal. "I've consulted with colleagues across the country. The consensus remains the same. The boy's condition, whatever caused it, happened before birth. The nerves that should connect their spinal columns to their legs simply aren't functioning properly. It's not a matter of money or treatment. It's a matter of physiology. So they'll never walk." Margaret's voice was flat, emotionless. She'd learned to protect herself by feeling nothing at all. "I'm sorry," Dr. Webb said again, because what else could he say? He touched her shoulder briefly, then collected his bag and left, nodding to Clara on his way out. Margaret returned to the window, staring out at the vast expanse of land her sons would never run across. Behind her she heard Samuel reading aloud to Benjamin, his voice steady and clear. They'd adapted, as children do. They'd built a life within the confines of their limitations. But Margaret couldn't shake the image of Thomas's face the first time he'd held them. The joy and wonder that had turned to anguish when he realized they couldn't move their legs. "Some things just aren't meant to be fixed," he'd said near the end, when the cancer was eating him alive, and he knew he'd never see them grow up. "But that doesn't mean they're broken. Those boys are perfect, Margaret. Promise me you'll remember that." She'd promised, but she'd lied. How could they be perfect when the world was built for people who could walk? When every door, every street, every simple pleasure required legs that worked? Clara appeared at her elbow, quiet as always. "You're thinking too much again. Someone has to think." "Clara, thinking and worrying aren't the same thing." The housekeeper handed her a cup of tea, already prepared the way Margaret liked it. "Those boys are happy. Look at them." Margaret looked. Samuel and Benjamin had abandoned their books and were now engaged in an elaborate game involving toy soldiers and a map they'd drawn of an imaginary kingdom. Their laughter filled the room like music, pure and unself-conscious. They were happy, she realized. Despite everything, they'd found joy in small things. It was Margaret who was drowning. "I'm going into town tomorrow," Clara said. "Need supplies and want to check on Reverend Stone. He's been feeling poorly. Take whatever you need from the account." Clara hesitated, which meant she had something else to say. Margaret waited, sipping her tea. "There's talk in town," Clara finally said. "About a stranger who rode in last week? Mountain man, from what folks say. Been asking questions about the area, about people. We get drifters all the time, Clara. This one's different, they say. Got a look about him. Like he's searching for something specific." Margaret felt a flicker of unease. The ranch was isolated enough that strangers were noteworthy, and in her experience, men who asked too many questions usually brought trouble. "Tell Morrison to keep the hands alert. I don't want any surprises." "Yes, ma'am." Clara paused. Though Martha at the general store said he seemed kind, gentle-like, not the rough sort. Even kind men can be dangerous. "Clara," the housekeeper nodded and withdrew, leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts and her tea. Outside, the autumn sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Winter would come soon, locking them in for months. Another season of sameness, of routine, of watching her sons grow older within the prison of their chairs. That evening, after supper and evening prayers, Margaret tucked the boys into their beds. They slept in a large room on the ground floor, specially arranged so they could move about independently. Thomas had designed it before he died. Wide doorways, lowered shelves, everything within reach. "Mama," Benjamin said as she pulled the quilt up to his chin. "Do you think Papa can see us from heaven?" The question pierced her heart. "I do, sweetheart. I think he watches over you every day. Then he knows we're doing our best," Samuel added quietly. "Even if we can't walk like other boys." Margaret kissed both their foreheads, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and innocence. "Your father was so proud of you. You have nothing to prove to anyone." But as she closed their door and walked to her own empty bedroom, Margaret wondered if she was telling them the truth or just repeating comfortable lies. Thomas had loved them fiercely, but he'd also spent his last months trying everything to help them walk. He'd built the wheelchairs as a last resort, not a first choice. She sat at her vanity and opened the drawer where she kept her most precious possessions. The gold locket lay on a bed of velvet, waiting. She lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight in her palm. Inside were 2 photographs, one of Thomas on their wedding day, young and full of hope, and one of the twins as infants, perfect and new. Before anyone knew, their legs would never carry them. Margaret fastened the locket around her neck, feeling it settle against her heart. She wore it every day, a reminder of what she'd had and what she'd lost. The weight of it was both comfort and burden, anchor and chain. Tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that, and the day after that. This was her life now, watching her sons adapt to a world that wasn't built for them. While she slowly forgot what it felt like to hope for anything different, she didn't know, as she finally blew out her lamp and settled into bed, that everything was about to change. She didn't know that the stranger Clara had mentioned was already making his way toward their ranch, drawn by something he couldn't explain. She didn't know that sometimes miracles came not with thunder and lightning, but with quiet determination and a pair of steady hands. Margaret Hastings fell asleep, believing tomorrow would be like every other day. She was wrong. The morning came cold and clear, with frost painting delicate patterns on the windows. Margaret woke to the familiar sounds of the ranch coming to life, cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the barn door, Morrison's voice calling instructions to the hands. She dressed by routine, fastened the locket around her neck, and went downstairs to begin another day, identical to all the others, except it wasn't. Clara was already in the kitchen, but her usual efficient bustle had been replaced by an unusual stillness. She stood by the window, looking out toward the front drive with an expression Margaret couldn't quite read. "What is it?" "That stranger I mentioned," Clara said quietly. "He's here." Margaret joined her at the window and saw him immediately. A man sat astride a sturdy roan horse at the edge of the front yard, not approaching but not leaving either. He was perhaps in his mid-40s, with a weathered face and broad shoulders beneath a worn leather coat. His hat was pulled low, but even from this distance, Margaret could see the patient stillness in the way he sat. He wasn't demanding entrance or making a scene. He was simply waiting, as if he had all the time in the world. "How long has he been there?" "Found him when I came down at dawn. Just sitting, watching the house, but not in a threatening way. More like," Clara paused, searching for words, "more like he's working up the courage to knock on a door." Margaret studied the stranger more carefully. He held something across his saddle, a long staff made of gnarled wood, worn smooth by years of use. There was something about the way he held it, not as a weapon, but as a support, a companion on long journeys. His horse stood calm and patient, well cared for and content. "I'll speak with him," Margaret said, reaching for her shawl. "Want me to fetch Morrison?" "No, I don't think he means harm." She wasn't sure why she believed that, but something in the man's bearing suggested he'd rather wait forever than cause alarm. Margaret stepped onto the front porch, pulling her shawl tight against the morning chill. The stranger noticed her immediately and dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with the ease of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. He approached slowly, stopping a respectful distance away, and removed his hat up close. Margaret could see the kindness in his eyes. They were grey-blue, like storm clouds breaking, and they held a depth that spoke of experience beyond simple years. His face was lined by weather and hardship, but there was nothing hard about his expression. If anything, he looked almost hesitant. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the cadence of careful thought. "My name is Caleb Stone. I apologize for the early hour and the intrusion. You've been sitting out here for some time, Mr. Stone. You could have knocked." A slight smile touched his lips. "Didn't want to presume. Figured if you wanted me gone, you'd send someone to say so. If you didn't, well, I could wait." There was something disarming about his honesty. Margaret found herself curious rather than frightened. "What brings you to my property, Mr. Stone?" "I was in town yesterday. Heard folks talking about you and your sons." He held up a hand quickly, seeing her expression close. "Not gossip, ma'am. Genuine concern. The storekeeper mentioned your boys, that they've been unable to walk since birth, that every doctor who's seen them says nothing can be done." Margaret felt the familiar defensiveness rise in her chest. "If you're here to sell me some miracle cure or false hope, Mr. Stone, you can save your breath and my time." "No, ma'am. I'm not selling anything." He turned his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture that seemed out of place on such a solid man. I've seen things in my travels. Men who were told they'd never walk again, finding their feet. Not through magic or medicine, but through patience and different ways of thinking about what's possible." "Are you a doctor?" "No, ma'am. I was an army medic during the war. Learned some from tribal healers in the years after. Mostly I've just spent time with people who needed help and nowhere else to turn." Margaret studied him carefully. There was no salesman's eagerness in his manner, no false promises in his eyes. Just a quiet sincerity that was either genuine or the best deception she'd ever encountered. "Why would you want to help my sons?" "What's in it for you?" Caleb looked away toward the mountains, and for a moment something old and painful crossed his face. "I had a family once, wife and daughter. Fever took them both about 8 years back. I couldn't save them, couldn't do anything but watch them slip away." He met her eyes again. "Ever since I've been wandering, helping where I can, moving on when there's nothing more to give. Maybe it's my way of making peace with what I couldn't do. Maybe it's just who I am now." The honesty in his words struck something deep in Margaret. She recognized the shape of his grief because she wore her own every day. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Stone, but my sons have been examined by the best doctors in the territory. If there was something that could be done..." "Ma'am, I'm not saying doctors are wrong. I'm just saying sometimes they don't know everything there is to know." He gestured with his staff, the movement natural and unthinking. "This here pine has been with me for 12 years. Keeps me steady on mountain trails, helps me cross streams, props up my tent at night. Doctors would say it's just a piece of wood, but I know it's more than that. It's a tool, a companion, a reminder of where I've been." Margaret didn't respond immediately. There was something in his words that went beyond logic, touching on faith and possibility. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Just let me meet them. Talk with your boys, if you're willing. See what they can tell me about what they feel, what they've tried. If I think there's nothing I can offer, I'll tip my hat and ride on. But if I see something, anything that might help, I'd like to try. Mr. Stone, I've spent 7 years hoping, 7 years trying everything anyone suggested. And all I have to show for it is 2 boys who've learned to live with disappointment." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "I won't let them hope again just to have it broken. Hope isn't the problem, ma'am. False hope is. I won't promise your boys anything except honest effort and my complete attention." Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. "But I've learned something in my years wandering. Sometimes the body just needs to remember what it's forgotten. Needs someone patient enough to help it remember." Margaret stood silent, her hand unconsciously reaching for the locket at her throat. Thomas would have sent this man away. Thomas had been practical, logical, grounded in what could be proven and measured. But Thomas was gone, and she was tired of being practical. She was tired of watching her sons accept limitations as inevitable. "One meeting," she heard herself say. "You can meet the boys. Talk with them. After that, we'll see." Relief washed visibly across Caleb's face. "Thank you, ma'am. You won't regret it." "I might," Margaret said, but there was no real conviction in her voice. "Tie your horse and come inside. They'll be waking soon." Caleb secured his mount with practiced efficiency, but Margaret noticed he kept the walking staff with him, carrying it as naturally as most men wore their hats. As they walked toward the house, Clara met them at the door with a look that said she'd heard everything. "I'll make coffee," the housekeeper said simply, and disappeared toward the kitchen. Margaret led Caleb into the front parlor, gesturing to one of the sturdy chairs. He sat but remained alert, not relaxed, as if he were a guest who knew he might be asked to leave at any moment. His staff leaned against the arm of the chair within easy reach. "That's quite a piece of wood," Margaret observed, more to fill the silence than from real curiosity. Caleb glanced at the staff with genuine affection. "Found it on a mountainside in Colorado. Was caught in a blizzard, lost my bearings. Grabbed onto what I thought was a tree branch to steady myself, but it was this, already broken free, just waiting there in the snow. Used it to feel my way down the mountain when I couldn't see 3 feet ahead. Saved my life that day. You think objects have purpose? That they find us when we need them? I think sometimes what we need and what finds us are the same thing." He met her eyes. "Wasn't planning to come through Cottonwood Creek. Was heading north to Montana. But my horse threw a shoe, and while the blacksmith was working, I heard people talking about your family. Something told me to stay to ask more questions. And here I am." Before Margaret could respond, she heard the familiar sound of wheels on hardwood. Samuel and Benjamin appeared in the doorway, having maneuvered themselves from their bedroom with the independence they'd developed over years. They stopped when they saw the stranger, curiosity replacing any hesitation. "Mama." Samuel's voice was cautious but not frightened. "Boys, this is Mr. Caleb Stone. He's come to visit with us." Margaret moved to stand beside them, a protective gesture she couldn't suppress. "Mr. Stone, these are my sons, Samuel and Benjamin." Caleb stood slowly and then did something unexpected. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eyes level with the boys. "Pleased to meet you both. Your mother tells me you're mighty fine scholars." Benjamin grinned immediately. "We read lots of books. Samuel likes history best, but I like the adventure stories." "Adventure stories are important," Caleb agreed seriously. "They teach us that impossible things sometimes turn out to be just difficult things in disguise." Samuel studied Caleb with his father's careful observation.
"Are you a cowboy?"
"Not exactly. More of a wanderer, I suppose. I've been a lot of things. Soldier, scout, healer when healing was needed. These days I mostly travel and help folks where I can. Can you help us?" Benjamin's question was direct, without guile. "Dr. Webb says our legs don't work right, that we'll always need our chairs." Margaret tensed, waiting for the easy platitudes or false promises. But Caleb simply nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Webb is a good man and a smart doctor. He's probably right about what he can see. But I've learned that what we can see isn't always everything there is." "What does that mean?" Samuel asked. "It means I'd like to talk with you boys. Learn about what you feel in your legs, what you've tried, what hurts and what doesn't. Then maybe, if your mama agrees, we could try some things together. No promises, but honest effort. Would that be all right?" The twins looked at each other in that way they had, communicating without words. Then they both turned to Margaret, questions in their eyes. She saw hope there, fragile and new, and it terrified her. But she also saw trust. Trust that she would make the right choice. Trust that she wouldn't let them be hurt. "We can try," Margaret said quietly. "But Mr. Stone is right. No promises." Caleb spent the next hour talking with the boys, asking questions that no doctor had ever thought to ask. Did they dream about walking? Could they feel temperature in their legs? When they imagined moving, did they sense anything at all? Samuel and Benjamin answered eagerly, animated by this adult who treated them not as patients, but as people with valuable knowledge about their own bodies. Margaret watched from the doorway, Clara beside her. "He's different," the housekeeper murmured. "Got a gentleness about him. The boys feel it. Gentleness doesn't heal paralysis, Clara. No, ma'am. But it might heal other things." When Caleb finally stood, thanking the boys for their time, Samuel wheeled closer. "Will you come back tomorrow, Mr. Stone?" "If your mother allows it, I'd like that very much." Benjamin reached out and touched the walking staff that Caleb held. "This is really smooth. Did you make it smooth?" "Years of holding did that. Started out rough as tree bark, but time and use wore it down to what it is now." Caleb smiled. "Sometimes things get better not by changing what they are, but by learning what they can become." As Margaret walked Caleb to the door, he paused on the porch. "Thank you for trusting me with your sons, ma'am. I know that wasn't easy. I haven't decided if I trust you yet. Mr. Stone, but I've decided to give you a chance. That's all I'm asking." He settled his hat on his head and retrieved his horse. Before mounting, he turned back. "One more thing, Mrs. Hastings. I saw the way you touched that locket when you were deciding. Whatever it represents, whoever gave it to you, I don't aim to replace or dishonor that. I'm just here to help, if help is possible." Margaret's hand went unconsciously to the locket. "My husband gave it to me. He died 3 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss." Caleb's voice carried genuine sympathy. "He built those wheelchairs, didn't he?" "I saw the craftsmanship. Made with love, he did. It was the last thing he made before he passed. Then he was a good man who loved his sons." Caleb swung into the saddle with easy grace. "I'll be back tomorrow morning if that suits you. And Mrs. Hastings, those boys of yours are remarkable. Paralyzed legs or not, they're full of life and intelligence. You've raised them well." He rode away before she could respond, leaving Margaret standing on the porch with emotions she couldn't quite name. Clara joined her, coffee cup in hand. "What do you think?" the housekeeper asked. "I think I've either made the best decision or the worst mistake of my life." Margaret watched Caleb disappear down the road, his staff visible even from this distance. "And I won't know which until it's too late to change my mind." Inside, Samuel and Benjamin were talking excitedly about Mr. Stone and his questions and his walking staff that had saved his life in a blizzard. Their voices carried the first notes of hope Margaret had heard in years, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. That night, as she tucked them in, Benjamin asked, "Do you think Mr. Stone really can help us walk, Mama?" Margaret chose her words carefully. "I think Mr. Stone will try his best. And I think trying is worth something, even if we don't get the results we hope for." "Papa tried too," Samuel said quietly. "He tried everything." "Yes, he did. Because he loved you both very much." "We love you too, Mama," Benjamin said, and Samuel nodded agreement. After they were asleep, Margaret sat in Thomas's study for the first time since his death. The room remained exactly as he'd left it. Papers on the desk, his coat on the chair, the smell of pipe tobacco still faintly lingering. She opened the drawer where he'd kept his personal journal and read the last entry, written 2 days before he died. "The boys are strong and bright and full of joy despite everything. Margaret carries the burden of their care with grace I don't deserve. I leave them in her hands, trusting she'll do what I could not, find a way forward. Not a cure, perhaps, just a way forward." Margaret closed the journal and looked around the room. Thomas had tried every conventional method, consulted every available expert, spent his last months searching for answers that didn't exist. But maybe he'd been searching in the wrong direction. Maybe the answer wasn't in what was known, but in what had been forgotten or overlooked. She thought of Caleb Stone and his walking staff, worn smooth by years of use. Of his quiet manner and his questions that focused not on limitations, but on possibilities. Of the way her sons had responded to him with immediate trust. Tomorrow he would return, and Margaret would have to decide whether to let him try something that might break her sons' hearts, or might, against all logic and reason, actually help them. She touched the locket at her throat, feeling Thomas's presence in the worn gold. "Help me know what to do," she whispered to the empty room. "Help me know if this is the chance we've been waiting for, or just another way to fail." The room offered no answer, but somehow Margaret felt a measure of peace. Whatever happened next, at least they were moving forward, instead of standing still in grief and resignation. At least there was, once again, something that felt like hope. Caleb Stone arrived at dawn, as promised. Margaret had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between hope and regret about her decision. She watched from the window as he dismounted, carrying not just his walking staff, but a worn leather pouch that hung from his shoulder. It was dark brown, softened by years of handling, with careful stitching along the seams where it had been repaired multiple times. She met him at the door before he could knock. "Mr. Stone, Mrs. Hastings." He nodded respectfully. "I appreciate you allowing me to return. The boys haven't talked about anything else since you left." Margaret stepped aside to let him enter. "I hope you understand the responsibility that comes with their hope." "I do, ma'am. And I take it seriously." He followed her into the parlor, where Samuel and Benjamin were already waiting, dressed and eager. Their faces lit up when they saw him. "Mr. Stone," Benjamin called out. "Did you bring your walking staff?" Caleb smiled and held it up. "Never go anywhere without it. But I brought something else too." He patted the leather pouch at his side. "Tools of the trade, you might say." "What kind of tools?" Samuel asked, leaning forward with interest. "Patience, son. First I need to talk with your mama about what I'd like to try." Margaret gestured to the chairs, and they all settled in. Caleb in the large chair, the boys positioned close, and Margaret perched on the edge of her seat with the wariness of someone expecting disappointment. Before Caleb could begin, Clara appeared with coffee and warm biscuits. Close behind her came an unexpected visitor, Dr. Harrison Webb, his medical bag in hand and concern written across his face. "Margaret, I heard in town that there's a stranger here claiming he can help the boys." The doctor's tone was protective, almost paternal. "I felt I should come just to make sure that I'm not being taken advantage of." Margaret finished. "I appreciate your concern, Harrison, but I'm perfectly capable of making decisions for my family." Dr. Webb's expression softened. "I know you are. But I've seen too many desperate families fall prey to charlatans promising miracles. I'd never forgive myself if I didn't at least check." Caleb stood and extended his hand. "Dr. Webb, I presume." "Caleb Stone, I'm not here to challenge your medical expertise or sell false hope. I'm just offering a different approach, if Mrs. Hastings and the boys are willing." The doctor shook his hand, but kept his skepticism evident. "What qualifications do you have, Mr. Stone?" "Served as a field medic in the war. Learned from healers among the Lakota and Cheyenne tribes during my time in the territories. Beyond that, just experience helping folks with various ailments." Caleb met the doctor's gaze steadily. "I'm not claiming to be a physician. I'm claiming to have seen things work that medical science said couldn't, such as a man named Jacob Thornton up in Montana. Took a bullet in the spine, paralyzed from the waist down. Doctor said he'd never walk again. Spent 2 years working with him, exercises, herbal treatments, teaching his body to remember what it knew before the injury. Last I saw him, he was walking with a cane, slow but steady." Dr. Webb's expression remained doubtful. "Spinal injuries are different from congenital conditions. These boys were born this way. Their nervous systems never developed the proper connections." "Maybe so," Caleb agreed. "But maybe the connections are there, just sleeping. Maybe they need to be woken up." Margaret watched the exchange with growing tension. The two men represented different worlds, one of science and proven methods, the other of intuition and possibilities. She understood Dr. Webb's skepticism because she shared it. But she also felt something else, something harder to name, when she looked at Caleb Stone's quiet confidence. "Harrison," she said carefully, "I value your expertise. You've cared for my family for years, but I'd like to hear what Mr. Stone proposes before we dismiss it entirely." The doctor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Very well. I'll listen, but I reserve the right to object if I believe the boys might be harmed." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Caleb said. He settled back into his chair and opened the leather medicine pouch, revealing an array of small cloth packets and glass vials. The boys leaned in, fascinated. "This here is my medicine pouch," Caleb explained. "Carried it for near 15 years now. Each of these packets contains herbs and remedies I've collected from different places and different healers. Nothing dangerous, nothing that'll hurt, but combinations that help with pain, inflammation, circulation, things that might make a difference if used consistently." He selected one of the packets and held it up. "This is willow bark and ginger root, ground fine and mixed with a bit of peppermint for taste. Good for reducing inflammation in joints and muscles. Might help increase blood flow to the boy's legs." Dr. Webb leaned forward to examine the packet. Willow bark contains salicin, similar to the active ingredient in medicines we use for pain and inflammation. The ginger aids digestion and circulation. It's not harmful, though I'm skeptical it will produce any meaningful change. "Fair enough," Caleb said. but it won't hurt to try, and it's a start." He looked at Samuel and Benjamin. "With your permission, I'd like to examine your legs properly. Not with instruments and medical tests, but with my hands. Feel the muscles, the joints, understand what's tight and what's loose. That all right with you boys?" They both nodded eagerly. Margaret found herself nodding too, though her heart hammered with a mixture of hope and fear. Caleb knelt beside Samuel's wheelchair first, his movements slow and deliberate. "Tell me if anything hurts or feels uncomfortable," he said, then gently began manipulating Samuel's right leg. He worked in silence for several minutes, his weathered hands moving with surprising gentleness. His fingers pressed along the thigh, the knee, the calf, as if reading a language written in muscle and bone. "You feel that?" he asked at one point, pressing gently behind Samuel's knee. Samuel's eyes widened. "Yes, it tingles." "Good, that's good." Caleb continued his examination, then moved to the left leg, repeating the process. When he finished with Samuel, he moved to Benjamin and performed the same careful assessment. Dr. Webb watched with clinical interest, his skepticism gradually giving way to professional curiosity.
What are you finding?
Caleb sat back on his heels, considering. Their muscles aren't atrophied as much as I'd expect. Someone's been working with them, keeping the tissue healthy. That was Thomas, Margaret said quietly. My husband. He massaged their legs every night, moved them through exercises even though the doctors said it was pointless. Wasn't pointless at all, Caleb said firmly. He kept their bodies ready for the possibility of use. That's going to help us. He looked at Dr. Webb. You've tested their reflexes, I assume. Extensively. No response to standard reflex tests. What about sensation? Temperature, pressure, pain? Limited sensation. They can feel pressure if it's strong enough, but fine sensation appears absent. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. Boys, I want to try something. I'm going to touch different spots on your legs, and I want you to close your eyes and tell me if you feel anything at all. Even the smallest sensation counts. For the next 20 minutes, Caleb worked systematically, testing responses with light touches, firm pressure, warm compresses from Clara's kitchen, and cold cloths. Dr. Webb observed with growing interest, occasionally making notes in a small journal he'd produced from his bag. The results were surprising. Both boys showed responses in areas the doctor had never detected. Benjamin felt warmth more clearly in his left leg. Samuel had distinct sensation along the outer edge of his right thigh. Small discoveries, perhaps, but discoveries nonetheless. Their nervous systems aren't completely disconnected, Caleb said finally. The pathways are there, just not functioning the way they should, like a road that's been blocked by fallen trees. The road still exists. We just need to clear it. That's a pleasant metaphor, Mr. Stone, Dr. Webb said. But the medical reality is more complex. Even if some sensation exists, that doesn't mean motor function can be restored. No, it doesn't mean it will be. But it means it might be. Caleb stood and addressed Margaret directly. Here's what I'd like to propose, ma'am. Daily sessions with the boys, morning and evening, about an hour each. I'll work on massage and manipulation to increase circulation and sensation. We'll use herbal preparations to reduce any inflammation that might be interfering with nerve function. And we'll do exercises, gentle at first, gradually building. What kind of exercises? Margaret asked. Visualization to start. Teaching the boys to imagine movement, to send signals from their brains to their legs, even if nothing happens at first. Then physical exercises, me moving their legs through natural walking motions, teaching their muscles the patterns they need to know. Mr. Stone, Dr. Webb interjected, I must say that while your approach is unconventional, it's not entirely without merit from a medical standpoint. Increased circulation and muscle maintenance certainly can't hurt. However, he paused, choosing his words carefully, I must caution against raising expectations too high. The boy's condition is congenital and severe. In all my years of practice, I've never seen a case like theirs improve significantly, and I respect that, doctor. But in all my years of wandering, I've seen things that doctors said were impossible. I'm not promising a miracle. I'm promising honest effort, and whatever results that effort brings. Margaret looked at her sons. They were watching the adults with rapt attention, hope shining in their young faces. She thought of Thomas and his nightly massages, his refusal to give up even when every expert told him to accept the unchangeable. She thought of the 7 years of resignation and sorrow, and she thought of the tiny sensations Caleb had just discovered, sensations that Dr. Webb had missed despite years of examinations. 1 month, she said decisively. Mr. Stone, I'll give you 1 month to try your methods. If we see improvement, we'll continue. If not, we'll accept that we tried something different. That's fair, Mom. More than fair. But, she continued, you'll work under Dr. Webb's observation. If at any point he believes the boys are being harmed or stressed beyond benefit, we stop immediately. Caleb nodded agreement, and Dr. Webb looked somewhat mollified by the compromise. Then we have an arrangement, Margaret said. Mr. Stone, there's a guest cabin behind the main house. It's small but comfortable. You're welcome to stay there during this trial period. I appreciate that. Mrs. Hastings, I'll earn my keep however I can. Work around the ranch, whatever's needed. The work I need from you is helping my sons. That's payment enough. Clara, who'd been watching from the doorway, spoke up. I'll get the cabin ready, Mrs. Hastings. Should have it livable by this afternoon. As the morning progressed, Caleb conducted the first official treatment session. He prepared a warm herbal compress from his medicine pouch, explaining each ingredient and its purpose. The boys watched, fascinated, as he mixed willow bark powder with ginger, adding warm water until it formed a paste that he spread on clean cloths. This might feel strange at first, he warned, wrapping Benjamin's legs with the warm compresses. But it should be comfortable. Tell me if it's too hot or causes any pain. It's warm, Benjamin said, but it feels good, like sitting by the fire in winter. Caleb repeated the process with Samuel, then began the massage work. His hands moved with practiced expertise, working the muscles in long, smooth strokes that followed the natural lines of circulation. He explained as he worked, teaching Margaret and Clara so they could help with sessions when he wasn't available. The key is consistency, he said. Not hard pressure, that can damage tissue. Gentle but firm, always moving toward the heart to encourage blood flow. We're waking the body up, reminding it what it's capable of. Dr. Webb remained for the entire session, observing with scientific detachment. When it concluded, he pulled Margaret aside. I still have serious doubts about ultimate success, but I must admit his technique is sound. The massage and herbal treatments are fundamentally harmless and may provide some comfort even if they don't restore function. But you don't believe they'll walk. The doctor's expression was sympathetic. Margaret, I've learned not to say never in medicine, but I want you to be realistic. Guard your heart and the boys' hearts. Hope is precious, but broken hope can be devastating. I know, Harrison. Believe me, I know. After the doctor left, Margaret found Caleb on the front porch, his walking staff leaning against the railing beside him. He was looking out at the mountains, lost in thought. You handled Dr. Webb well, she said, joining him. He's protective of us. He's a good man doing his job. I don't fault him for skepticism. I'd be skeptical too if I were in his position. Caleb glanced at her. But I've learned to trust what I feel in my hands. Those boys have more capacity than anyone's given them credit for. Mr. Stone, I need to ask you something directly. Margaret turned to face him fully. Why are you really doing this? The truth, not the polite answer you gave before. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. My daughter was 5 when the fever took her. Bright as summer sunshine, curious about everything. Near the end, she couldn't even lift her head from the pillow. I was a trained medic, had a pouch full of medicines and years of experience, and I couldn't do a damn thing to save her. He paused, his jaw tight. Your boys remind me of her, that brightness, that spirit that won't be dimmed by circumstance. Maybe I can't give you guarantees, Mrs. Hastings, but I can give effort and skill and everything I've learned. And maybe this time that'll be enough. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for yours. Thomas was a good man. I can see his love in everything around here, especially in those boys. Caleb picked up his staff, running his thumb along the smooth wood. We're both carrying grief, ma'am. Maybe we can carry hope alongside it just for a while. That evening, After the boys were asleep and Caleb had settled into the guest cabin, Margaret sat in her room with the leather medicine pouch he'd left for her to examine. Each small packet was carefully labeled in neat script: willow bark, ginger root, chamomile, arnica, cayenne, and a dozen others she didn't recognize. She opened one and breathed in the scent of dried herbs, earthy and ancient. This pouch represented years of learning, of wandering, of collecting knowledge from different cultures and different healers. It was worn and repaired, obviously precious to its owner. The fact that Caleb had entrusted it to her care spoke of his commitment. She thought about Dr. Webb's warning about guarding hearts and broken hope. But she also thought about Thomas's dying words: find a way forward. Not a cure, perhaps, just a way forward. Maybe Caleb Stone wasn't offering a cure. Maybe he was just offering movement in a new direction, which was more than they'd had in 3 years. Margaret closed the medicine pouch and set it carefully on her dresser beside the locket. 2 objects, 2 different kinds of medicine. One from her past, one possibly leading to their future. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Margaret Hastings felt something that went beyond mere existence. She felt anticipation. The 1-month mark arrived with early autumn colors, painting the mountains in shades of amber and crimson. Margaret stood in the parlor, watching Caleb work with the boys, and marveled at how much had changed. The small toe movements had progressed to leg flexes. The leg flexes had become sustained muscle engagement. But the boys still couldn't stand independently, couldn't bear their own weight, couldn't take even a single step. Dr. Webb had visited 3 days prior, conducting his most thorough examination yet. His conclusion was cautiously optimistic: unprecedented improvement in voluntary movement and muscle tone, but significant challenges remained in developing the strength and coordination needed for actual ambulation. Caleb had listened to the doctor's assessment with his characteristic calm, then simply nodded and said, "Then we build strength and coordination, one day at a time." That morning, he'd arrived with something new, a wooden frame constructed from sturdy pine, sanded smooth, and fitted together with careful joints. It stood about 4 feet tall with parallel bars running horizontally at different heights and a padded platform at the base. "What is it?" Benjamin asked, wheeling closer to examine the structure. "It's a standing frame," Caleb explained. "Been building it in my cabin the past week. Thought it was time we graduated from lying down exercises to something more ambitious." Samuel reached out to touch the wood, running his fingers along the smooth grain. "It's beautiful. You made this?" "With some help from Morrison for the heavy lifting. But yes, I made it." Caleb positioned the frame in the center of the parlor, testing its stability. "The idea is simple. We secure you boys in this frame so you're safely supported, then gradually let your feet take more and more of your weight. Teaches your legs what standing feels like, builds the muscles you'll need." Margaret felt her pulse quicken. "Is it safe?" "Completely. They'll be strapped in at the chest and waist. Even if their legs give out entirely, they won't fall." Caleb met her eyes. "But I believe their legs will hold, at least partially. They're stronger than they've ever been. Can we try it now?" Benjamin's excitement was palpable. "That's why I brought it," Caleb smiled. "Samuel, you first. You're the brave guinea pig." With Caleb's guidance and Margaret's help, they maneuvered Samuel from his wheelchair into the standing frame. Caleb secured the padded straps carefully, ensuring they were snug but not constricting. Samuel's feet rested flat on the padded platform, his legs straight, but clearly not bearing any weight yet. "How does that feel?" Caleb asked. "Strange," Samuel admitted. "I'm upright, but it doesn't feel like standing. More like hanging. That's because you're not engaging your legs yet." Now comes the interesting part. Caleb positioned himself in front of Samuel, placing his hands on the boy's knees. "I'm going to count to 3. When I get to 3, I want you to imagine pushing down through your feet. Imagine your legs are strong pillars holding you up. Don't worry about whether it works. Just try. Ready?" Samuel nodded, his face set with determination. 1, 2, 3. For a moment, nothing changed. Then Margaret saw it. A subtle shift in Samuel's posture, a slight straightening of his spine, a minute tensing in his legs. The straps went fractionally looser as his body took on a tiny portion of its own weight. "That's it," Caleb encouraged. "Hold it for 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Rest now." Samuel's legs relaxed immediately, the straps taking his full weight again. But his face glowed with triumph. "I felt it. I felt my legs holding me for a second." "You did more than feel it. You did it. Actual weight-bearing." Caleb looked at Margaret and she saw pride and vindication in his expression. "That's the foundation we build from." They repeated the exercise 5 more times, with Samuel holding the position slightly longer each time. By the 6th attempt, he managed to support himself for nearly 15 seconds before his legs trembled and gave out. Benjamin was practically vibrating with eagerness when his turn came. His results were similar, that first moment of genuine standing, brief but unmistakable, followed by the gradual building of endurance. By the end of the session, both boys had experienced what it felt like to be upright, with their legs actually participating in holding them there. "This changes everything," Margaret said to Caleb after the boys had returned to their wheelchairs, exhausted but exhilarated. "They're actually standing." "Supported standing," Caleb cautioned, but he was smiling. "But yes, this is a significant step." Pun intended. Over the next week, the standing frame became the centerpiece of their routine. Morning and evening sessions now included 30 minutes of standing practice, with the boys gradually increasing. Both the duration and the percentage of their weight their legs could support. Margaret documented everything in a journal she'd started, keeping how long each boy could stand, which leg seemed stronger, any pain or discomfort, every small victory. She found herself thinking in medical terms, analyzing progress with the same careful attention Dr. Webb brought to his examinations. The town's attitude began shifting as word spread of the boys' progress. People who'd once whispered pity now spoke with cautious optimism. Some visited the ranch specifically to see the standing frame and watch the exercises. Margaret found herself demonstrating techniques, explaining Caleb's methods, and answering questions from other families dealing with various ailments. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. Edmund Cross arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, announced by the thunder of hoofbeats and the aggressive way he dismounted. Margaret recognized him immediately. A successful rancher from the neighboring territory, Thomas's one-time rival, and a man who'd made his interest in acquiring the Hastings land abundantly clear after Thomas's death. He was tall and imposing, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed everything in terms of value and advantage. He'd proposed marriage to Margaret twice in the year following Thomas's death, proposals she'd rejected politely but firmly. He hadn't approached her directly in nearly 2 years. Though his foreman occasionally appeared with offers to buy the ranch at increasingly insulting prices. "Mrs. Hastings," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "I heard interesting rumors about your household and had to see for myself." "Mr. Cross, what brings you to my property uninvited?" Margaret kept her voice level, though irritation simmered beneath, curiosity mainly. "Heard you've taken in some drifter claiming he can make your boys walk." Sounded like a sideshow, so I thought I'd investigate. His eyes swept the porch, where the standing frame was visible through the parlor window. "That's some kind of torture device?" "That's a standing frame, and it's helping my sons develop strength and coordination." Margaret crossed her arms. "Not that it's any of your concern." "Everything about you concerns me, Margaret." Cross's voice dropped to something meant to sound intimate, but came across as presumptuous. "You know how I feel about you, how I've felt since before Thomas died. Mr. Cross, I've made my feelings clear repeatedly. I'm not interested in your attention, your proposals, or your offers to buy my ranch. Your feelings might change when you accept reality. This ranch is too much for a woman alone. Your boys will never run this land. Hell, they can't even walk it. And now you've brought in some con man, filling their heads with false hope. It's sad, Margaret. Truly sad." Before Margaret could respond, Caleb emerged from the barn, carrying an armload of firewood. He took in the scene immediately, Margaret's rigid posture, Cross's aggressive stance, and adjusted his path to join them. "Ma'am," he said, acknowledging Margaret while studying Cross. "Everything all right?"
Who are you?
Cross demanded. "Caleb Stone. I'm helping Mrs. Hastings with her son's treatment. The miracle worker himself." Cross's tone dripped with contempt. "Let me guess. For a generous fee. You're going to make paralyzed boys walk. How convenient. How profitable." "I'm not charging Mrs. Hastings anything," Caleb said calmly. "And the boys are making genuine progress. You're welcome to speak with Dr. Webb if you doubt it. Dr. Webb is a small-town physician who wouldn't know real medicine if it bit him. You're both fooling yourselves, and you're using this woman's desperation to line your pockets or worse." Cross stepped closer to Margaret. "I'm offering you a way out, Margaret. Marry me. Sell me this ranch at a fair price. Hell, keep the house and 10 acres for yourself. Your boys will have proper care, and you'll have a man who can actually provide for you. I don't need you to provide for me, Mr. Cross. I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." "Are you? Because from where I stand, you're throwing money at false hope while your ranch deteriorates. Your husband built something solid here, and you're letting it crumble out of stubborn pride." Caleb set down his firewood with deliberate care. "I think the lady has asked you to leave, Mr. Cross. I don't recall being addressed by the hired help. I'm not hired help. I'm a guest who's been invited to stay. You, on the other hand, were not invited and are not welcome." The tension between the two men was palpable. Cross had several inches in height and considerable arrogance. But Caleb had something else, a quiet danger, the coiled readiness of someone who'd faced real threats and survived. "This isn't over." "Margaret," Cross said finally, turning back to his horse, "when this charlatan's miracle cure fails, when you're left with nothing but more broken hopes and mounting debts, remember I offered you a way out." He rode away at an aggressive pace, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Who was that delightful individual? Caleb asked once Cross was out of sight. "Edmund Cross owns a large spread about 30 miles west. He was Thomas's competitor, then became his occasional ally, and then became a persistent nuisance after Thomas died." Margaret found herself shaking slightly. "He's proposed marriage twice and made repeated offers to buy the ranch. I've refused every time. He doesn't seem to handle rejection well. He doesn't handle anything well except accumulation. Land, cattle, influence. He wants to own everything he sees." Margaret sighed. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. No apologies necessary. Though I'm curious about something he said. Mounting debts. Is the ranch in financial trouble?" Margaret hesitated, then decided honesty was warranted. Not trouble exactly, but Thomas's death left some things unsettled. There were legal fees, medical expenses, and the ranch operation hasn't been as profitable the last 2 years. I've been using savings to cover shortfalls. We're stable for now, but Cross isn't entirely wrong that I should be paying more attention to the business side of things. You've been focused on your sons. That's not wrong. It's not right either if I can't maintain the home Thomas built for them." She looked at Caleb directly. "You're working without payment, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be compensated. Once the harvest comes in," Margaret. He used her first name for the first time, the sound of it warm and natural. "I told you when I started, I don't want payment. Watching those boys progress, seeing the hope return to this family, that's worth more than money. But nothing. I've got few needs and simple tastes. Board and a roof are plenty." He smiled slightly. "Besides, Morrison has me helping with ranch work in the afternoons. I'm earning my keep." The front door opened, and Samuel appeared, wheeling himself onto the porch. "Mama, is everything all right?" "We heard shouting." "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just an unwelcome visitor who's now gone." "Was that Mr. Cross?" "I saw him from the window. He seemed angry." "Mr. Cross is often angry. It's not something you need to worry about." Margaret went to her son, kneeling beside his wheelchair. "How are you feeling? Ready for afternoon exercises?" "Always ready." Samuel looked at Caleb. "Can we practice in the standing frame again?" "I want to beat my time from this morning. That's the spirit. Give me 10 minutes to stack this firewood, and we'll get you boys set up." As Caleb headed back to his task, Margaret watched him go, her mind churning with thoughts she hadn't fully formed before. Cross's visit had crystallized something. This situation couldn't remain in comfortable limbo forever. Caleb's presence was transforming more than just her son's physical capabilities. It was transforming the entire household, her own emotional landscape, and the way people perceived their family. Eventually, they'd have to define what this was, what Caleb was to them, what they were becoming together. But for now, in this moment, it was enough to know that he'd stood beside her against Cross's aggression, that he'd defended her sons and her choices without hesitation, that when he spoke her name, it sounded like coming home. That evening, after another successful session where Benjamin managed to stand for nearly a full minute with minimal support, Margaret found herself on the porch again with Caleb. It had become their unspoken routine after the boys were asleep. They'd spend a few minutes in quiet conversation before retiring. "Thank you for earlier," she said. "With Cross, you didn't have to step in." "Yes, I did. That man was being disrespectful and threatening. I couldn't stand by. He's powerful in this territory. Has connections with territorial officials, friendship with judges and business owners. Making an enemy of him could cause complications. Then I'll deal with complications when they come." Caleb leaned back against the porch railing, his walking staff beside him. "Margaret, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart suddenly beat faster. "What is it?" "When I first arrived, I told myself I was just here to help the boys, to do what I could and then move on, like I always do. But it's become more than that." He met her eyes in the moonlight. "This feels like home. You and the boys feel like family. And I don't want to move on." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if you'll have me, I'd like to stay. Not just until the boys can walk, but beyond. As long as you'll let me." He held up a hand. "I'm not asking for anything defined or permanent. I know Thomas will always be important to you, as he should be. I'm just asking for the chance to keep being part of this family in whatever way makes sense." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "Clara noticed something between us. She said I look at you differently." "How do I look at you?" "She didn't say. But I think I know. The same way I look at you." She moved closer, her hand finding his. "Thomas was my love, my partner, the father of my children. He'll always hold that place in my heart. But I'm discovering there's room for more than memory. There's room for new feelings, new possibilities. I'm not trying to replace him. I know. You couldn't if you tried. You're entirely your own person. But maybe that's what I need. Not a replacement, but something new." She squeezed his hand. "I can't make promises about the future, Caleb, but I can tell you that having you here, watching you with my sons, seeing your dedication and kindness, it's awakened something in me I thought had died with Thomas." "What's that?" "Hope, not just for the boys, but for myself. For the possibility that life holds more than just surviving from one day to the next." Caleb lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both old-fashioned and deeply romantic. "Then I'll stay, and we'll discover what the future holds together." They stood together in the moonlight, hands linked, the future uncertain but filled with possibility. Inside, Samuel and Benjamin slept peacefully, their legs growing stronger each day. Above them, stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, indifferent to human hopes and fears, but somehow bearing witness to this moment of transformation. Margaret touched her locket with her free hand, feeling Thomas's presence there not as a weight, but as a blessing. She imagined him smiling, approving, urging her forward into whatever came next. For the first time in 3 years, Margaret Hastings felt fully, completely alive. 6 weeks into treatment marked a turning point that went beyond physical progress. The boys could now stand in the frame for several minutes at a time, their legs trembling but holding. More importantly, they developed a sense of balance and body awareness that had been completely absent before. But it was the quiet transformation in Margaret herself that most captured Clara's attention. The housekeeper had known Margaret since before her marriage to Thomas, had watched her grow from hopeful bride to devoted mother to grief-stricken widow. Now she was witnessing something new, Margaret emerging from the chrysalis of mourning into someone more whole than she'd been even before loss. The change was evident in small ways. Margaret laughed more readily. She hummed while working. She took extra care with her appearance, not out of vanity, but out of renewed engagement with life. And most tellingly, she wore Thomas's memory lightly now. The locket at her throat no longer a chain, but a cherished reminder. One morning, Margaret found Clara in the kitchen and approached with something wrapped in cloth. "I want to give this to Caleb, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate." Clara wiped her hands and accepted the wrapped object. Inside was Thomas's pocket watch, beautifully crafted gold, with an engraved case showing mountains and pine trees. It had been Thomas's most prized possession, passed down from his father. "Are you sure?" Clara asked gently. "Thomas would want someone worthy to have it. Someone who embodies the values he held dear: honesty, dedication, love of family." Margaret's voice was steady. "Caleb deserves this. He's earned it not through obligation, but through character. Then give it to him. But understand what you're saying with this gift. Giving a man your late husband's watch, that's a statement, Margaret. To him and to everyone who knows, I know what I'm saying. I'm saying that I honor the past while embracing the present. I'm saying that loving again doesn't diminish what came before." She met Clara's eyes. "I'm saying that Caleb Stone has become important to me, and I'm no longer afraid to acknowledge it." Clara pulled her into a brief, fierce hug. "Thomas would be pleased. He never wanted you frozen in grief." That evening, after the boys were settled in bed and the house had grown quiet, Margaret found Caleb in his usual spot on the porch. He looked up as she approached, his face softening with the expression she'd come to recognize, the one that said she mattered to him in ways beyond simple employment or friendship. "Margaret, couldn't sleep? I wanted to give you something." She held out the wrapped watch. "This belonged to Thomas. His father gave it to him on his wedding day. He treasured it." Caleb unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing the pocket watch. Even in the dim porch light, the gold gleamed warmly. He opened it, revealing the delicate mechanism inside and a small photograph of Margaret and Thomas on their wedding day. "Margaret, I can't accept this. It's too precious, too personal. You can, and I want you to have it." Thomas believed that objects should be used, not locked away. That time itself was a gift not to be wasted. She sat beside him. He would want someone worthy to carry this, someone who understands its value, not in gold, but in what it represents. Caleb ran his thumb over the engraving, his expression reverent. "What does it represent to you?" "Family, legacy, the passing of responsibility from one good man to another." Margaret's voice was steady, despite the emotion in her words. "You've become part of this family, Caleb. The boys look to you as they once looked to their father. And I—" She paused, gathering courage. "I've come to rely on you in ways I never expected to need anyone again." "Margaret," her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I need you to understand something. When I lost my family, I thought that part of my life was over. That I'd spend my remaining years wandering, helping where I could, but never putting down roots. Then I came here and everything changed. Changed how? Samuel and Benjamin remind me why life matters. Why struggle is worthwhile. Why hope isn't foolish." He looked at her directly. "And you remind me that hearts can heal. That starting over isn't betrayal, it's courage." Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I was so afraid that caring for you meant letting go of Thomas. But I've realized it doesn't work that way. Love isn't finite. There's room for what was and what is." Caleb set the watch carefully aside and took both her hands in his. "I will never try to replace Thomas, but if you'll let me, I'd like to stand beside you. Not as his replacement, but as myself. As someone who loves you and your sons and wants to be part of your future." "I want that too," Margaret whispered. "More than I knew I could want anything again." They sat together, hands intertwined, while the night settled around them. Eventually, Caleb fastened the watch chain to his vest, the gold catching the moonlight. "I'll carry this with honor," he promised. "And every time I check the time, I'll remember that I'm living on borrowed moments, borrowed from the man who built this family, given freely by the woman who's letting me join it." Inside the house, neither of them knew that Samuel had woken and ventured from his room for a drink of water. The boy paused at the window, watching his mother and the mountain man sitting close together, hands linked. He smiled, a child's instinctive understanding that sometimes adults needed each other the way children needed parents. He wheeled back to his room and whispered to Benjamin, "I think Mama's going to be happy again." Benjamin stirred sleepily. "Because of Mr. Stone?" "Yes, is that okay?" Benjamin thought for a moment, then nodded. "Papa would want her to be happy. And Mr. Stone is nice. He's teaching us to walk. He's teaching us lots of things," Samuel agreed, settling back into bed. "I think he might stay forever." "Good," Benjamin murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "I like him." The following days brought both triumph and challenge. The boys' progress continued, but they hit what Caleb called the plateau, a period where improvement slowed and frustration grew. "Why can't I stand longer?" Benjamin asked one afternoon, his voice edged with tears after a particularly difficult session. "I was doing so well, and now I'm stuck." Caleb knelt beside the boy's wheelchair. "Progress isn't a straight line, Benjamin. Sometimes your body needs time to consolidate what it's learned before moving forward. Think of it like climbing a mountain. Sometimes you need to rest at a camp before attempting the next peak. But what if I never get better than this? What if I can only ever stand for a few minutes? Then those few minutes are more than you had before." "But I don't think that's where your story ends." Caleb placed a hand on Benjamin's shoulder. "I've seen this pattern before. The plateau often comes right before a breakthrough." Samuel, listening from his own wheelchair, added quietly, "Papa used to say that patience was the hardest kind of bravery. Your papa was a wise man." Caleb agreed. Dr. Webb's weekly visit that Friday confirmed Caleb's assessment. "The boys have made remarkable progress, but we're reaching the limits of what passive support can achieve. To progress further, they'll need to attempt actual weight-bearing steps." "I've been thinking the same thing," Caleb said. "The standing frame has done its job. Now we need something that allows movement while still providing safety." "What did you have in mind?" "Parallel bars. The boys can hold on for balance while attempting to move their feet forward. Start with just shifting weight from one leg to the other, gradually build to actual steps." Margaret felt anxiety spike. What if they fall? What if attempting too much too soon causes injury? "That's why we'll go slowly, with full support," Caleb assured her. "And why we'll pad the floor underneath." "But Margaret, they're ready for this. Their muscles are strong enough, their balance is improving. Keeping them in the standing frame now would actually hold them back." Dr. Webb nodded agreement. "For once, Mr. Stone and I are in complete accord. The boys need this challenge to continue progressing." Over the next 3 days, Caleb and Morrison constructed parallel bars in the parlor, 2 sturdy rails at waist height for the boys, running about 8 feet in length. The floor beneath was padded with quilts and cushions. The structure was solid but not intimidating, offering support without imprisoning. When Samuel and Benjamin saw the new equipment, their eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and fear. "This is it, isn't it?" Samuel asked. "This is where we try to actually walk. This is where you take the next step," Caleb confirmed. No pun intended. The first attempt was both terrifying and exhilarating. With Caleb on one side and Margaret on the other, Samuel stood at the bars, his hands gripping the rails with white-knuckled intensity. His legs trembled, bearing his full weight for the first time without the standing frame's support. "I'm standing," he breathed. "I'm actually standing on my own." "You are indeed. Now when you're ready, no rush. I want you to shift your weight to your right leg. Just lean a little to that side. Feel how your left leg gets lighter." Samuel's face scrunched with concentration. Slowly, incrementally, he shifted his weight. His left foot came fractionally off the ground. "Perfect. Now shift back to center, then to the left." The process was painstaking, each weight shift requiring intense focus and effort. But Samuel managed it, moving his weight from side to side in what would eventually become the rhythm of walking. Benjamin's turn came next, and he approached the bars with fierce determination. His first attempt at shifting weight resulted in his legs buckling, but Caleb and Margaret were there, catching him before he could fall. "That's okay," Caleb said calmly. "Try again. Your legs are learning." On the 4th attempt, Benjamin succeeded in shifting his weight. By the end of the session, both boys had managed to lift one foot completely off the ground while standing, not a step. but the precursor to one. That night, Margaret collapsed into her chair, emotionally exhausted, but hopeful. Clara brought her tea and sat beside her. "They're going to walk," the housekeeper said with quiet certainty. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but they're going to walk." "I'm starting to believe it," Margaret admitted. "After so many years of being told it was impossible, I'm actually believing it might happen. And what about the other impossible thing that's happening?" Margaret smiled. "You mean Caleb and me? The whole town's talking about it. How you gave him Thomas's watch. How you look at each other. How he's moved from guest to something more permanent. Let them talk. I'm tired of living for other people's opinions." Margaret sipped her tea. "Thomas has been gone 3 years. I've mourned him properly, honored his memory. But I'm 34 years old, Clara. I have decades ahead of me, God willing. Am I supposed to spend them alone out of some misguided loyalty to a man who would never have wanted that for me? Of course not. I'm just making sure you're certain. I'm certain that Caleb Stone is a good man. I'm certain he loves my sons, and they love him. I'm certain that when I'm with him, I feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible." Margaret met Clara's eyes. "I'm not certain what the future holds, but I'm certain I want him in it." Clara patted her hand. "Then that's all that matters." The weeks that followed brought steady progress. The boys graduated from weight shifting to actual foot movements, sliding 1 foot forward an inch, then 2 inches, then 3. Their first true steps were more controlled falls than walking, but they were steps nonetheless. The town watched with growing amazement. Families who'd kept their distance out of pity now visited with genuine interest. Other parents with children facing various challenges sought Caleb's advice. He gave it freely, sharing techniques and knowledge without reservation. Edmund Cross, however, remained conspicuously absent. Margaret hadn't seen him since his confrontational visit weeks earlier, though she occasionally heard reports of him making inquiries in town, about the ranch's finances, about Caleb's background, about the boy's progress. "He's looking for leverage," Morrison warned Margaret one afternoon. "Man like Cross doesn't forget a rejection. He's biding his time. Let him bide," Margaret replied. "We have nothing to hide, and nothing he can use against us." But even as she spoke the words, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered uncertainty. Men like Cross were dangerous not because they were strong, but because they were patient. They waited for moments of vulnerability, then struck with precision. She pushed the worry aside, focusing instead on the miracle unfolding in her home. Her sons were learning to walk. She was learning to live again. Caleb had brought more than healing techniques and herbal remedies. He'd brought transformation. One evening, as autumn deepened toward winter, Margaret stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Caleb joined her, and she leaned against him naturally, his arm coming around her shoulders as if it had always belonged there. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing possibility where everyone else saw limitation. For refusing to give up on my sons. For helping me remember that life is for living, not just surviving." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for letting me try. For trusting me with your family. For giving me a place to belong." Inside, Samuel and Benjamin were practicing standing without the bars, Clara hovering nearby for safety. Their laughter carried through the open window, pure and joyful. Margaret touched the locket at her throat, then the pocket watch chain visible at Caleb's vest. Past and present, memory and hope, loss and discovery, all of it woven together into something new and precious. The future remained uncertain. Winter was coming, and with it whatever challenges Edmund Cross might bring. But for this moment, in this space, everything was exactly as it should be, whole, healing, home. 8 weeks had passed since Caleb Stone first rode onto the Hastings ranch. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Samuel and Benjamin could now take several halting steps while holding the parallel bars, their legs growing stronger each day. The town had witnessed the impossible becoming possible, and the Hastings home had become a symbol of hope and perseverance. Margaret had never been happier. Her sons were progressing beyond anyone's expectations, and her relationship with Caleb had deepened into something she knew was love, even if they hadn't yet spoken the word aloud. They moved through their days with the comfortable rhythm of partners, sharing glances that spoke volumes, touches that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. The first snow of the season had fallen overnight, dusting the mountains in white and bringing a crisp clarity to the morning air. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, watching Caleb help the boys with their morning exercises, when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Her contentment evaporated instantly. Through the window, she saw Edmund Cross riding up the drive, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. One wore a territorial badge. The other carried himself with the officious bearing of a lawyer or government official. Clara appeared at her elbow. That's Judge William Hartley with him, the territorial circuit judge. What would a judge be doing here with Cross? Nothing good, I'd wager. Margaret met them at the front door, her spine straight and her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Cross, gentlemen, what brings you to my home? Judge Hartley dismounted, a heavy-set man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and an air of weary authority. Mrs. Hastings, I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm afraid I'm here on official business. What kind of business? The third man stepped forward, producing a leather portfolio. Mrs. Hastings, my name is Vernon Blake. I'm a territorial land agent. It's come to our attention that there may be a discrepancy regarding the legal boundaries of your property. Margaret felt cold dread settle in her stomach. A discrepancy? Cross dismounted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's a complicated matter, Margaret. Perhaps we should discuss this inside. We'll discuss it right here. What exactly are you claiming, Mr. Cross? Blake opened his portfolio, extracting several documents. According to territorial surveys conducted in 1875, a portion of what you know as the Hastings Ranch is actually unclaimed territorial land. Specifically, approximately 600 acres, including the main ranch house and immediate grounds. The world seemed to tilt beneath Margaret's feet. That's impossible. My husband purchased this land legally. He had all the proper deeds and documentation. Mr. Hastings certainly purchased land, Blake agreed. However, the boundaries described in his original deed don't align with the actual territorial survey markers. It appears there was an error in the original filing, possibly innocent, possibly not. The land in question was never actually owned by Mr. Hastings because it was never available for private purchase. This is absurd. Thomas spent years establishing this ranch. Every official document, every tax payment, every legal record confirms our ownership. Judge Hartley stepped forward, his expression grave. Mrs. Hastings, I've reviewed the documents Mr. Blake provided. Unfortunately, there does appear to be a legitimate question about the land boundaries. The territorial survey markers don't match the descriptions in your late husband's deed. Then the survey markers are wrong. Survey markers are official territorial property, ma'am. They carry legal weight. The judge's tone was almost apologetic. Mr. Cross has filed a formal claim on the territorial land in question, as is his right. Until this matter is resolved, I'm required to issue a preliminary injunction. An injunction for what? Mr. Cross has purchased the territorial rights to the disputed land. Per territorial law, if the current occupants cannot prove legitimate ownership within 30 days, the new claimant takes possession. The words hit Margaret like physical blows. You're saying I have 30 days to prove I own my own home, or Edmund Cross can take it? In essence, yes. Judge Hartley actually looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hastings, but the law is clear on territorial claims. Caleb had emerged from the house, the boys behind him in their wheelchairs. He took in the scene immediately and moved to stand beside Margaret, his presence solid and reassuring. What's happening? Samuel asked, his young voice tight with worry. Adult business, son, Caleb said gently. Nothing for you to worry about just now. But Benjamin, ever perceptive, looked at his mother's face and knew something was terribly wrong. Cross addressed Margaret directly, his voice carrying false sympathy. I know this is difficult, Margaret, but you have to understand, I'm simply following legal procedures. When I discovered this irregularity, I had no choice but to act. You discovered it or you manufactured it. Caleb's tone was flat and dangerous. Careful, Drifter. You're not part of this discussion. I'm part of this family, which makes it very much my discussion. Judge Hartley held up a hand. Gentlemen, let's keep this civil. Mrs. Hastings, you have 30 days from today to produce documentation that proves your ownership of the disputed land according to the territorial survey boundaries. If you can do so, Mr. Cross's claim will be dismissed. If you cannot, you'll be required to vacate the property. Vacate? Margaret's voice cracked. You're telling me I might lose my home. The home my husband built, where I'm raising my sons. I'm telling you that you need to review your late husband's papers very carefully. Look for original survey documents, correspondence with territorial offices, anything that might establish clear ownership under the correct boundaries, Blake added. The territorial office in Cheyenne would have records as well, though it may take some time to access them. I'd suggest you start searching immediately. How generous, Caleb said coldly. You show up with 30 days' notice on a land claim that's been apparently uncontested for over a decade, and suggest she search for documents that may not even exist anymore. The law doesn't concern itself with convenience, Mr. Stone, Cross replied. Only with facts and ownership. Margaret found her voice, though it shook with barely contained fury. This is about revenge, isn't it? I rejected your proposals, so you're trying to take my home. This is about rightful ownership. If you can prove the land is yours, you'll keep it. If you can't, Cross shrugged, then it never belonged to you in the first place. Judge Hartley cleared his throat. Mrs. Hastings, I've prepared the official notification. You'll need to sign acknowledging receipt. Margaret took the document with trembling hands, scanning the legal language that reduced her life to property disputes and boundary markers. She signed with her maiden name initially, then crossed it out and wrote Margaret Hastings with fierce, deliberate strokes. 30 days from today, the judge confirmed. I'll return on November 15th for the hearing. Be prepared to present your evidence. The three men mounted their horses. Cross paused before leaving, his expression shifting to something almost pitying. Margaret, it doesn't have to be this way. Marry me and this all goes away. I'll tear up the claim documents right now. You and the boys can stay here, properly cared for, protected. Get off my property, Margaret said through clenched teeth. And don't come back unless you're prepared for a fight. Cross smiled thinly. 30 days, Margaret. Think about what you're throwing away out of pride. They rode away, leaving Margaret standing on her porch with her world crumbling around her. The moment they were out of sight, her knees buckled. Caleb caught her, his strong arms preventing her collapse. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. Samuel and Benjamin wheeled closer, their faces pale with fear. Mama, what's happening? Samuel asked. Are we going to lose our home? Margaret pulled herself together with visible effort, kneeling between her sons' wheelchairs. Mr. Cross has challenged our ownership of the ranch. It's a legal matter, complicated and unpleasant. But we're going to fight it. How? Benjamin's voice was small. By finding your father's original documents. By proving this land belongs to us. She forced confidence into her voice. Your papa was meticulous about records. Somewhere in this house are the papers we need. Clara had appeared in the doorway, her face grim. Mr. Hastings kept all important documents in his study. The one you've barely entered since he died? Margaret felt a chill run through her. Thomas's study. She'd unlocked it once for Caleb, but she'd been avoiding it for years, unable to face the physical reminder of her husband's absence. Then that's where we start, she said, standing with renewed determination. Boys, I need you to continue your exercises with Clara. Caleb, will you help me search? Of course. The study looked exactly as it had weeks earlier when they'd briefly entered it, frozen in time. Dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Thomas's presence still palpable in every object and paper. Margaret stood in the doorway, gathering courage. He kept everything, she said quietly. Every receipt, every letter, every business document. He said you never knew when you'd need proof of something. They spent the remainder of the day sorting through Thomas's meticulously organized files. There were cattle sale receipts, equipment purchases, correspondence with suppliers, tax records going back years. But the deed itself, the original deed to the property, was frustratingly vague about specific boundaries, referring instead to 6,000 acres more or less and landmarks that may have shifted over time. "This is the problem," Caleb said, holding up the deed. "Thomas bought the land in good faith, but the description is imprecise. It mentions the old oak at Bear Creek and the granite outcropping south of Eagle Ridge, landmarks that could be interpreted different ways, but we have the deed. Doesn't that prove ownership? It proves he bought something. But if the survey boundaries don't match what he thought he was buying, then legally..." Caleb trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. Margaret sank into Thomas's chair, the weight of the situation crushing her. "Just when the boys are learning to walk. Just when we're finally healing. And now we might lose the only home they've ever known." "We're not beaten yet," Caleb said firmly. "Tomorrow I'll ride to Cheyenne, search the territorial records myself. There has to be something there that establishes clear ownership. Cheyenne is 3 days' ride in good weather. In early winter conditions, possibly longer. And you'd be leaving right when the boys need you most. The boys need a home more than they need practice sessions. And they have you and Clara to continue the exercises." Margaret looked at him, this man who'd become so central to their lives. "Why are you doing this? You could walk away. This isn't your fight. It's absolutely my fight. This is my family now." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "Margaret, I meant what I said weeks ago. I want to stay. I want to be part of this family permanently. I can't do that if there's no home to come back to. But if we lose, then we'll face that together. But I won't let Cross win without a fight." Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in gentleness. "Thomas built this place with his own hands. He raised those boys here. We owe it to his memory to fight for what he created." Margaret pulled him close, burying her face against his chest. "I'm so afraid, not just of losing the ranch, but of the boys losing hope. They were making such progress, and now they have something to fight for beyond themselves. Sometimes the strongest motivation is protecting what we love." That evening, after a subdued dinner, where even the boys' usual chatter was muted, Margaret tucked Samuel and Benjamin into bed. They looked up at her with questions in their eyes. "Mama, if we have to leave," Samuel said quietly, "will Mr. Stone come with us?" The question caught her off guard. "Would you want him to?" Both boys nodded immediately. "He's teaching us to walk," Benjamin said. "But he's also like having a papa again. Not replacing Papa, but being there the way Papa was." Margaret felt tears threaten. "Mr. Stone cares about you both very much. Whatever happens with the ranch, he'll still be part of our lives. Promise?" Samuel's voice was small. "I promise." After they were asleep, Margaret returned to the study, unable to rest. She lit the oil lamp and continued sorting through Thomas's papers, searching desperately for anything that might save them. Hours later, she found something, a letter from Thomas to a territorial surveyor, dated 6 months before his death. In it, Thomas mentioned discrepancies he'd noticed between his deed and the official territorial maps. He'd hired the surveyor to conduct a private survey and resolve the issues. Margaret's hands shook as she read further. Thomas had found the same problem Cross was now exploiting. But Thomas had been working to fix it, corresponding with territorial officials, preparing documentation to correct the deed. He died before finishing the process. She found more letters, responses from territorial offices, promises of revised documents, confirmations that Thomas's claim was legitimate. But nowhere did she find the final corrected deed that would prove their ownership beyond question. "What did you find?" Caleb appeared in the doorway, unable to sleep himself. Margaret showed him the letters. Thomas knew about the problem. He was fixing it. But he died before it was resolved. So the corrected documents might exist somewhere in the territorial system, just never finalized. Maybe. Or maybe Thomas's death meant the process was simply abandoned, leaving the original flawed deed as the only official record. Caleb read through the letters carefully. These help. They show Thomas acted in good faith, that he recognized the issue and was addressing it legally. A judge might view that favorably. Might being the operative word. It's more than we had this morning. Caleb set the letters carefully aside. I'm still going to Cheyenne tomorrow. These letters mention specific officials and office files. I can track them down, see if Thomas's corrected documents were ever filed. It's dangerous, riding this time of year. The mountain passes. I know the mountains better than most. I'll be fine. He pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. We're going to save this place, Margaret. I promise you, don't make promises you can't keep. I never do. They stood together in the lamplight, surrounded by a dead man's careful records, fighting for a home that might no longer legally be theirs. Outside, the first real storm of winter was building, dark clouds gathering over the mountains like an omen. Margaret thought of Samuel's sketch journal, filled with drawings of running and playing. She thought of Benjamin's determination, his fierce joy at each small victory. She thought of Caleb's steady presence, the way he'd transformed their lives with his quiet belief in possibilities. She thought of Edmund Cross's cold smile and his calculated cruelty, using the law as a weapon to punish her rejection. We'll fight, she said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. For the boys, for Thomas's memory, for everything this place represents. We'll fight with everything we have. That's my girl, Caleb murmured, kissing her forehead. That's my fierce, brave girl. But even as they held each other, both knew the truth. 30 days wasn't much time to undo years of legal ambiguity. And Edmund Cross had clearly been planning this for months, maybe longer. The odds were not in their favor, but as Caleb had taught the boys, impossible and difficult weren't the same thing. And difficult things could be overcome with determination, patience, and refusal to surrender. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. Dawn broke cold and grey as Caleb prepared for his journey to Cheyenne. Margaret stood on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, watching him secure supplies to his horse with practiced efficiency. His walking staff was strapped to the saddle, a constant companion even now. 3 days there, at least 2 days. Searching records 3 days back, Caleb calculated. 8 days total if weather holds and I don't run into complications. That gives us about 2 weeks after I return to prepare for the hearing. It's not enough time, Margaret said, voicing the fear they both felt. Then we'll make it enough. He checked his saddle cinch one last time, then turned to face her fully. While I'm gone, keep searching Thomas's papers. There might be something we missed. Correspondence, receipts, anything that establishes clear ownership under the correct boundaries. I will. And I'll write to every official Thomas mentioned in his letters. Maybe someone remembers the case, can provide supporting documentation. Caleb pulled her close, heedless of propriety or watching eyes. I'll come back, Margaret, and I'll bring what we need. Just come back safe. That's all I ask. He kissed her then, a long, thorough kiss that spoke of promises and determination and love, unspoken but deeply felt. When he pulled away, both were breathing hard. Keep the boys practicing, he said. Don't let this setback derail their progress. I won't. Samuel and Benjamin appeared at the door, having wheeled themselves out despite the cold. Mr. Stone, Benjamin called. You're leaving? Caleb crossed to kneel before them. Just for a week or so. I'm going to find the papers that prove this ranch belongs to your family. What if you can't find them? Samuel's practical nature surfaced. Then I'll come back and we'll figure out another way. But I promise you both, I'm not letting anyone take your home. We'll keep practicing, Benjamin said with fierce determination. When you come back, we're going to walk to meet you. Caleb's eyes shone with emotion. I'd like that very much. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat to Margaret and the boys, and rode off into the grey morning. They watched until he disappeared down the road. Then Margaret ushered the boys inside, away from the biting wind. The days that followed were a blur of activity and anxiety. Margaret spent every spare moment in Thomas's study, sorting through years of accumulated papers. Clara took over more of the household duties. Freeing Margaret to search, Dr. Webb visited twice, offering both medical observation of the boys and moral support for Margaret. I've made inquiries in town, the doctor said during his second visit. Cross has been building this case for months. He had surveyors out here last spring when you were focused on the boys' early treatments. He's been planning this takeover for a long time. Can that work against him legally? The fact that he was deliberately deceptive. Only if we can prove he falsified documents or bribed officials. Otherwise, he's just a man exercising his legal rights, however morally repugnant his timing. Margaret wanted to scream with frustration, but she channeled the energy into continued searching. She found more letters, more receipts, more evidence of Thomas's meticulous record-keeping, but nothing that definitively solved the boundary dispute. On the third day of Caleb's absence, she made a decision she'd been avoiding for 3 years. She entered Thomas's bedroom, unchanged since his death, his clothes still in the wardrobe, his personal items still on the dresser. She sat on the bed he'd died in and let herself cry. Not just for the current crisis, but for everything, for Thomas's death, for years of watching her son struggle, for the weight of responsibility she'd carried alone. When the tears finally stopped, she felt something shift inside her. She'd been holding on to Thomas's memory so tightly that she'd been half living, existing in the past, rather than fully embracing the present. Losing the ranch would be devastating, but she realized with sudden clarity that it wouldn't destroy them. Home wasn't just a place, it was the people you loved and who loved you back. With renewed perspective, Margaret returned to searching, but this time she looked for different things, not just legal documents, but Thomas himself. His journals, his personal writings, anything that might reveal what he'd been thinking in those final months. She found his diary in a drawer of the bedside table, leather-bound and worn. She'd never read it before, respecting his privacy even after death. But now she opened it, searching for entries from his final year. The words were heartbreaking and beautiful. Thomas's love for his family, his fears about dying and leaving them, his determination to secure their future. And then, 2 months before his death, an entry that made her heart race. Met with Surveyor Mitchell today. He's confirmed my suspicions. The original deed boundaries are incorrect, overlapping with territorial land. But he's also confirmed that my purchase was legitimate. The error was the territory's, not mine. Mitchell is preparing corrected documentation. Once filed, it will establish beyond doubt that the Hastings Ranch is entirely private property. Should be complete within 6 months. At least I'll leave Margaret and the boys with that security. Margaret's hands trembled. Thomas had hired a surveyor. The corrected documentation existed, or at least had been in progress. If Mitchell had completed his work before Thomas died, those documents might still exist somewhere. She searched frantically for any mention of Surveyor Mitchell, receipts, correspondence, anything. Finally, in a box of miscellaneous papers, she found it. A receipt dated 3 weeks before Thomas's death, showing final payment to Mitchell Survey Services, completion of boundary documentation, and filing with Territorial Office. Thomas had paid for the completed work. The corrected documents had been filed. They existed somewhere in the territorial system. Margaret wanted to ride to Cheyenne immediately, but logic prevailed. Caleb was already there, searching the records. She needed to stay here, continue preparing and wait for his return. She carefully copied Mitchell's name and all relevant information into a letter, which she sent by express rider to Cheyenne, hoping it would reach Caleb and give him the lead he needed. The boys noticed their mother's renewed energy and determination. Samuel, ever observant, asked one evening after their practice session, "Mama, are we going to be all right?" Margaret knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But I know we're going to fight for our home with everything we have. And I know that no matter what happens, we'll still be a family. Will Mr. Stone still be part of our family if we have to leave?" The question pierced her heart. "I believe he will. He's proven he's committed to us, not just to this place." Benjamin wheeled closer. "I like Mr. Stone, Mama. I think Papa would like him too." "I think so too, darling. Your father would approve of any man who treats you both with such kindness and respect." That night, Margaret wrote in her own journal for the first time in months. She documented everything, The search for Thomas's papers, the discovery of the surveyor's receipt, her hopes and fears about the upcoming hearing. She wrote about Caleb, allowing herself to put into words what she'd been feeling but hadn't fully acknowledged. "I love him," she wrote. "Not in the same way I love Thomas. That was a love built over years of shared life and children and building a future together. This is different. This is a love born of transformation and possibility, of watching him give my sons hope and helping me remember how to live. Thomas will always be my first love, the father of my children, the foundation of who I became. But Caleb is my second chance, and I'm grateful beyond words that life has offered me this gift." The 5th day of Caleb's absence brought the first major snowfall of the season. Margaret stood at the window, watching thick flakes blanket the ranch, and felt worry gnaw at her. The mountain passes would be treacherous. If Caleb got caught in a storm, she pushed the thought away. He was experienced, capable, and careful. He would be fine, but the worry remained, a constant presence in the back of her mind. Dr. Webb visited that afternoon, stamping snow from his boots on the porch. "Roads are getting bad. If this keeps up, travel will be impossible for days. Caleb's still in Cheyenne. He'll be caught in this. He struck me as a man who knows how to handle himself in rough country. I'm sure he'll wait out the worst before attempting the return journey." Margaret knew the doctor was right, but knowing didn't ease her anxiety. She needed Caleb back, not just for the documents he might find, but for himself, for the steadying presence he'd become. The boys, confined indoors by the storm, grew restless. Margaret turned their energy toward a project, creating a detailed map of the ranch from memory, marking every landmark Thomas's deed had mentioned. Samuel's artistic skills proved invaluable, and Benjamin contributed his remarkable memory for detail. "The old oak at Bear Creek is here," Benjamin said, pointing to a spot on their growing map. "And the granite outcropping south of Eagle Ridge is there. I remember Papa showing us. That's at least a mile apart," Samuel noted. "If those are the boundaries, then the house is definitely on our land, not territorial property." Margaret studied their work with growing hope. "You boys might have just helped save our home. This map, combined with the documents we've found, could make a strong case." Clara, watching from the doorway, smiled. "Those boys have their father's sharp minds." Thomas would be proud. The 7th day brought a break in the weather, blue skies and brilliant sunshine reflecting off fresh snow. Margaret rose at dawn, unable to shake the feeling that something significant would happen today. She was right. Mid-morning, one of Morrison's ranch hands rode up fast, calling for Mrs. Hastings. "Ma'am, there's a rider coming hard from the east. Looks like Mr. Stone, but he's pushing his horse awful hard for these conditions." Margaret's heart leapt with hope and fear. She grabbed her coat and rushed outside, shading her eyes against the snow glare. In the distance, a dark figure approached at a gallop. Snow flying from his horse's hooves. It was Caleb, and even from a distance, she could sense his urgency. He pulled up hard in front of the house, his horse lathered despite the cold. Caleb dismounted in one smooth motion, pulling a leather document case from his saddlebag. "I found them," he said, breathing hard from the ride. "I found Mitchell's corrected survey documents. They were filed with the Territorial Office 3 weeks before Thomas died, exactly as his receipt indicated." Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. "Are they legitimate? Will they hold up in court?" "They're official territorial documents, properly filed and stamped. They clearly establish that the entire Hastings Ranch, including the house and all buildings, is private property legally purchased by Thomas. There's no territorial land within your boundaries. Then we're safe. We can stop Cross's claim?" Caleb's expression darkened. "That's where it gets complicated. The documents exist, but someone, and I'd bet everything I own it was Cross or someone working for him, filed a challenge to their validity 2 months ago. They claim the survey was fraudulent, that Mitchell was paid to falsify results." Margaret felt hope and despair warring in her chest. "Can they prove that? Not that I could find. But the challenge means the documents are under review. The Territorial Office won't release them as official evidence until the review is complete, which could take months." We don't have months. We have a week, I know. That's why I made copies. Caleb patted the document case. Unofficial but detailed and notarized by a clerk who owed me a favor. We can present these at the hearing, argue that the originals exist and are being deliberately suppressed. Will Judge Hartley accept copies? I don't know. But it's what we have to work with. Caleb looked exhausted, his face drawn with fatigue. I rode through the storm, Margaret. Couldn't wait for better weather because every day counts. I need to tell you everything I found, but first I need to see the boys. I promised them I'd return. They went inside together, where Samuel and Benjamin were waiting anxiously. The moment they saw Caleb, both boys broke into huge smiles. Mr. Stone, Benjamin shouted. You came back! Told you I would. Caleb knelt between their wheelchairs, and both boys threw their arms around him. Heard you boys have been practicing hard. We have, Samuel said. We can take 4 steps now, holding the bars. 4 whole steps. Well, I made a promise before I left. You said you'd walk to meet me when I returned. Think you're ready to try? The boys exchanged glances, nervous excitement clear on their faces. With the bars, Benjamin asked, however you want to do it. I just want to see what you've accomplished. Clara and Margaret helped position the boys at one end of the parallel bars, while Caleb stood at the other end, about 6 feet away. The space between them seemed vast. We can do this, Samuel said to Benjamin, and his brother nodded. They started together, hands gripping the rails, concentrating fiercely. Right foot forward, shift weight, left foot forward, shift weight. Their movements were slow and deliberate, legs trembling with effort. But they were moving. Margaret held her breath, her heart in her throat, step by step. The boys made their way along the bars toward Caleb. Once, Benjamin's leg buckled and he caught himself on the rail. Samuel paused to make sure his brother was all right. Then they continued together. When they reached Caleb, having traversed the full length of the bars, he caught them both in a fierce embrace. That was beautiful, perfect. I'm so proud of you both. Margaret found herself crying again, but these were tears of joy mixed with the strain of the past week. Her sons were walking. They were actually walking, and Caleb had returned with hope. That evening, after the boys were asleep and exhaustion had finally caught up with Caleb, Margaret sat with him by the fire, studying the copied documents he'd brought back. Mitchell did excellent work, she said, tracing the detailed survey lines. This clearly shows our boundaries, and there's no overlap with territorial land. The problem is proving these copies are authentic when the originals are tied up in bureaucratic review. Caleb rubbed his eyes tiredly. Cross is clever. He knew the documents existed, so he couldn't claim they didn't. Instead, he's challenging their validity, which keeps them locked away while still casting doubt. So we present the copies, along with Thomas's letters, showing he commissioned the survey. We present the receipt showing he paid for completion. We show that he acted in good faith throughout. Margaret set the documents down. And we pray Judge Hartley is a fair man. There's one more thing. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. I found Surveyor Mitchell. He's retired now, living in Denver. I rode there on my way back, lost a day, but it was worth it. He remembers Thomas and the survey clearly. He's written a sworn statement attesting to the accuracy of his work and confirming that the documents filed with the Territorial Office are genuine. Margaret took the letter with shaking hands. This could make the difference. It's our best chance. Caleb stood, wincing at stiff muscles. But we need to prepare for the possibility that it won't be enough. Cross has money, influence, and a judge who may be in his pocket. We're fighting uphill, then we climb. Margaret stood as well, facing him directly. Thomas built this ranch with his own hands. He wanted his sons to inherit it, to have a legacy. I won't let Cross steal that without exhausting every option. Caleb pulled her close, and she melted into his embrace. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would have given up by now. Most people haven't had a mountain man show up and teach them that impossible is just another word for difficult. He smiled against her hair. In fair point, they stood together, drawing strength from each other. Outside, the snow had started falling again, gentle and steady. The hearing was in 6 days. 6 days to prepare their case, to organize their evidence, to find any additional documentation that might help. 6 days to save their home. The next morning, Margaret woke with renewed purpose. She sent urgent telegrams to everyone Thomas had corresponded with about the property. Territorial officials, legal advisors, anyone who might have records or memories that could support their case. She wrote to Mitchell directly, thanking him for his statement and asking if he had any additional documentation. Dr. Webb arrived with news from town. Cross is telling everyone the hearing is a formality, that you can't possibly produce sufficient evidence. He's already making plans to take possession. Let him plan, Margaret said grimly. We're not beaten yet. The doctor handed her a document. I took the liberty of writing my own statement. About the boy's progress under Caleb's care, about your character and dedication to this community, about Thomas's reputation. It's not directly related to the land claim, but it establishes you as a person of integrity who deserves fair treatment. Margaret felt her eyes well up. Harrison, thank you. You don't know what this means. I've watched you these past months, Margaret. Watched you transform from someone barely surviving to someone fully alive. I've seen what Caleb and Hope have done for this family. I'll be damned if I let Cross destroy that because of legal technicalities. Over the following days, support materialized from unexpected sources. Morrison wrote a statement about Thomas's character and his clear ownership of the land. Clara provided testimony about the family's history and their legitimate claim. Even some of Cross's own ranch hands, disgusted by their employer's tactics, came forward with information about how Cross had been planning this takeover for months. The boys, understanding the gravity of the situation, threw themselves into their practice with renewed vigor. Each day they grew stronger, took more steps, spent more time bearing their own weight. We're going to walk into that courtroom, Samuel declared. We're going to show everyone what this family can do. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Margaret said gently. We're not proving it to them, Mama. We're proving it to ourselves. And to Papa's memory, the night before the hearing, Margaret couldn't sleep. She paced the house, reviewing documents, rehearsing arguments, fighting rising panic. She ended up in Thomas's study, surrounded by his life's work. Caleb found her there near midnight. Come to bed, Margaret. You need rest. I can't. What if we lose? What if everything Thomas built is taken away because of a surveying error and Cross's greed? Then we'll build something new together. He pulled her to her feet. Margaret, look at me. Really look at me. She met his eyes, seeing love and determination there. No matter what happens tomorrow, we're going to be all right. The boys are walking. You're strong and capable. We have each other. A building and land don't make a family, people do. And this family is unbreakable. I love you, Margaret said, the words finally spoken aloud. I love you, Caleb Stone, and I'm terrified of losing everything right when I've finally found happiness again. I love you too. Have since the first time I saw you standing on that porch, trying to be brave for your sons. He kissed her softly. Tomorrow we fight. Tonight we rest. We'll need our strength, he was right. Margaret let him lead her from the study, closing the door on Thomas's past. Tomorrow would determine their future. They were as prepared as they could be. The evidence was organized, the statements were written. The case was as strong as they could make it. Now it was in the hands of Judge William Hartley and whatever sense of justice he possessed. Margaret lay in bed, Caleb's presence in the next room a comfort. She touched her locket one last time, whispering a prayer to Thomas's memory. Help us tomorrow. Help us save what you built. And help me trust that whatever happens is what's meant to be. Sleep finally came, fitful but necessary. And when dawn broke on the day of the hearing, Margaret Hastings rose to face whatever judgment awaited. Judge Hartley adjusted his spectacles and continued. First, the timing of Mr. Cross's challenge to Mitchell's survey documents is deeply suspicious. Dr. Webb's evidence suggests the challenge was filed strategically, not through standard territorial procedures. Second, the revelation about Surveyor Rawlings's disciplinary history casts significant doubt on the reliability of the 1875 survey that forms the foundation of Mr. Cross's claim. Edmund Cross leaned forward, his face tightening. His lead lawyer stood. Your Honor, Rawlings's later problems don't automatically invalidate his earlier work. Perhaps not. But they require this court to question which survey is more likely to be accurate, one conducted by a surveyor later found unreliable, or one conducted by a surveyor with an unblemished record. Judge Hartley tapped the papers before him. Third, and most significantly, I have here Thomas Hastings' correspondence, his journals, his receipts, and his clear documentation of discovering the boundary issue and taking immediate legal steps to resolve it. This is not the behavior of a man trying to defraud the territory. This is the behavior of an honest rancher trying to correct an error. Margaret felt Caleb's hand find hers under the table. Squeezing tightly, Your Honor, Cross's lawyer tried again. Good intentions don't establish legal ownership. No, they don't, but proper documentation does. The judge lifted Mitchell's surveyor statement. George Mitchell has provided a sworn statement attesting to the accuracy and authenticity of his 1883 survey. He is a respected surveyor with decades of experience and no history of fraud or misconduct. His testimony carries considerable weight, testimony that can't be cross-examined, the lawyer argued. Mitchell isn't here to defend his work because he's an elderly man in Denver, and this hearing was scheduled with minimal notice. Judge Hartley's tone grew sharp. Another suspicious element of this case, the rush to hearing. The challenge keeping official documents out of reach. The pressure on a widow to surrender her property quickly. Mr. Cross, this entire proceeding has the appearance of legal manipulation rather than legitimate territorial claim. Cross stood abruptly. Your Honor, I resent the implication. Sit down, Mr. Cross. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. I'm not finished. An electric tension filled the courtroom. Everyone leaned forward, sensing a turning point. I've also reviewed the property tax records, Judge Hartley continued. Mrs. Hastings and her late husband before her have been paying property taxes on the full 6,000 acres for over a decade. The Territorial Office has been accepting those payments without question. If this land were truly territorial property, those taxes would have been rejected or redirected. The fact that they weren't suggests the territory has been treating the Hastings Ranch as private property all along. Blake, the territorial land agent, shifted uncomfortably. The tax records are maintained by a different office. Your Honor, the surveyors and the tax collectors don't always communicate effectively. Then perhaps they should. Judge Hartley set down his papers and looked directly at Margaret. Mrs. Hastings, I want to ask you a question directly. If I rule in your favor, what are your intentions for this property? Margaret stood, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. To continue running it as my husband intended, Your Honor. To raise my sons there. To preserve the legacy Thomas Hastings built with his own hands. And to live out my days on land that belongs to my family. And Mr. Stone. The judge's gaze shifted to Caleb. What is your role in this family? Caleb stood as well. I'm the man who loves Mrs. Hastings and her sons, who intends to stand beside them, help them build their future, and honor Thomas Hastings' memory by protecting what he created. Are you planning to marry Mrs. Hastings? The blunt question caught everyone off guard. Margaret felt her face flush, but Caleb answered without hesitation. If she'll have me, yes. I'd be honored to be her husband and a father to those boys. Judge Hartley nodded slowly, then looked at Samuel and Benjamin. Boys, you walked into this courtroom today. That must have taken tremendous courage. Yes, sir, Samuel answered. But Mr. Stone taught us that hard things are just impossible things we haven't figured out yet. Wise advice. Tell me, why was it important to you to walk in here today? Benjamin spoke up. Because this is our home. Because our papa built it for us. Because we wanted everyone to see that Hastings don't give up. Not on walking, not on our home, not on each other. A murmur of approval ran through the courtroom. Judge Hartley's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. I see. And if you had to leave this home, what would you miss most? Samuel thought carefully before answering. The porch where Papa used to read to us. The barn where he taught us about horses. The creek where he showed us how water shapes the land over time. But mostly, his voice wavered slightly, Mostly we'd miss knowing Papa is still there with us, in every board and nail he placed. Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting tears. In the gallery, Clara was openly weeping. Even some of the townspeople looked moved. Judge Hartley was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up his gavel. "I've heard enough. This court finds that the evidence presented by Mrs. Hastings, including Thomas Hastings's documented efforts to resolve the boundary dispute, Zavea Mitchell's sworn statement and professional survey work, the questionable reliability of the 1875 survey, and the suspicious timing of challenges to legitimate documentation, all support the conclusion that the Hastings Ranch is private property, legally purchased and properly owned." Margaret felt the world spin. Caleb's hand tightened on hers. Furthermore, the judge continued, his voice growing stern, "I find that Mr. Edmund Cross's claim appears to be motivated not by legitimate territorial interest, but by personal agenda. The strategic timing, the suppression of contradicting evidence, and the pressure tactics used against a widow suggest behavior unworthy of a man of his supposed standing." Cross shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous, Mr. Cross. You will sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt." Judge Hartley's voice could have cut stone. "I am not finished." Cross sat, his face purple with rage. "It is the judgment of this court that Margaret Hastings is the legitimate owner of the property known as the Hastings Ranch, comprising 6,000 acres, as described in the corrected survey conducted by George Mitchell in 1883. Mr. Cross's territorial claim is hereby dismissed with prejudice, meaning he cannot refile this same claim. Mrs. Hastings, your property rights are confirmed and protected under territorial law." The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to echo forever. For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted. Margaret collapsed into her chair, sobbing with relief. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and the boys wheeled close, all of them holding each other. Dr. Webb was shaking hands with Morrison. Clara had made her way through the crowd to embrace them all. Edmund Cross stormed from the courtroom, his lawyers scrambling to follow. As he passed Margaret's table, he leaned in and hissed, "This isn't over." Caleb stood, stepping between Cross and Margaret. "Yes, it is." The judge ruled with prejudice. "You have no legal recourse, and if you continue harassing this family, I'll make sure every newspaper between here and Denver knows exactly what kind of man you are." Cross's eyes blazed with fury, but he had no response. He stalked out, slamming the courthouse door behind him. Judge Hartley called for order. "Mrs. Hastings, please approach the bench." Margaret stood on shaking legs and approached, Caleb beside her for support. The judge's expression was kind now, the sternness reserved for Cross fading. "Mrs. Hastings, I want you to know that I've seen many property disputes in my years on the bench. Very few have moved me the way this one has. Your husband built something worth protecting, and you've fought for it with dignity and determination. Those boys of yours are a credit to both their parents. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't know how to express my gratitude. No gratitude necessary. I simply applied the law fairly." He paused. "However, I would recommend you have a proper surveyor, perhaps Mitchell if he's willing, conduct a comprehensive boundary survey and file updated documentation with the territorial office. Make sure everything is absolutely clear and indisputable. Don't give anyone room to challenge your ownership again." "I'll do that immediately, Your Honor." "Good. And Mr. Stone." The judge addressed Caleb directly. "I don't know what brought you to Cottonwood Creek, but this family is fortunate you arrived. Those boys walking into my courtroom was one of the most remarkable things I've witnessed. You've given them a gift beyond measure. They gave themselves that gift, Your Honor. I just showed them how to unwrap it." Judge Hartley smiled. "Well said. This court is adjourned." The final gavel fell, and it was truly over. Outside the courthouse a crowd had gathered. Word of the ruling had spread quickly, and townspeople wanted to express their support. Margaret found herself shaking hands, accepting congratulations, feeling overwhelmed by the outpouring of goodwill. But it was Samuel and Benjamin who drew the most attention. The boys who'd been carried into town in wheelchairs just weeks ago were now standing with their canes, tired but triumphant. "Can you boys walk a bit more?" a townsman asked. My daughter has been in a wheelchair since a fall last year. Seeing you walk, it's given us hope." Samuel and Benjamin looked at their mother, who nodded permission. Together, with Caleb and Morrison flanking them for safety, the boys walked a full block through town. People lined the streets, applauding, some crying. When they finally returned to the wagon, both boys were exhausted, but glowing with pride. "We did it, Mama," Benjamin said. "We walked and we won. You certainly did, my darlings. I'm so proud of you both." The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter than the morning journey. Margaret sat between her sons, Caleb driving the wagon, and allowed herself to finally relax. The home Thomas built was secure. Her sons were walking. The man she loved had stood beside her through the worst of it. Everything that had seemed impossible 3 months ago had somehow become real. As they approached the ranch house, Margaret saw it with new eyes. Every board Thomas had cut, every nail he'd driven, every dream he'd poured into this place, it was still theirs, still home. Clara had ridden ahead and already had supper warming. The ranch hands came by to offer congratulations. Dr. Webb stopped in to check on the boys and share a celebratory drink with Caleb. That evening, after the excitement had faded and the boys were finally asleep, Margaret found Caleb on the porch. Their home. "You meant what you said in court," she said quietly. "About marrying me, every word. But I want to ask properly, when the time is right. Not in a courtroom under a judge's questioning. The time is right now." Margaret took his hands. "Tomas will always be part of my heart, but there's room there for you too. For a different kind of love, built on different foundations. For a future instead of just a past." "Margaret Hastings, are you proposing to me?" "I believe I am." Caleb laughed, then grew serious. "Then my answer is yes. With all my heart, yes." He kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, and Margaret felt the last pieces of her broken heart finally heal. Not forgetting Thomas, never that, but making room for new joy alongside old memory. "The boys will be pleased," she murmured against his shoulder. "The boys already told me I should ask you. Apparently they've been planning our wedding for weeks." Margaret laughed through happy tears. "Of course they have." They stood together, looking out at the land that was truly theirs now. The mountains rising in the distance, the creek singing its endless song, the barn where Thomas had taught his sons about responsibility and care. This was home. Not because of the buildings or the land boundaries, but because of the love that had been poured into it by Thomas, by Margaret, by Caleb, by two boys who'd learned that impossible was just another word for difficult, and difficult things, as they'd all learned, could be overcome with patience, determination, and the courage to keep trying when everyone else said to give up. The future stretched before them, uncertain but bright. There would be challenges ahead, of course. There always were. But they would face them together, as a family, as they should be. 3 months later, early spring painted the ranch in shades of green and gold. The snow had melted from all but the highest peaks, and the meadows burst with wildflowers. Margaret stood on the porch, her porch, legally and irrevocably hers, and watched her sons walk across the yard, not with canes, not with support, just walking, their gait still slightly uncertain but unmistakably independent. Samuel carried a bucket toward the barn, moving carefully but confidently. Benjamin followed, chattering about a bird's nest they'd discovered in the hayloft. Their voices carried across the morning air, full of life and possibility. "Never gets old, does it?" Caleb appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. He wore Thomas's pocket watch on his vest, the gold catching the sunlight. "Never," Margaret agreed. "Every time I see them walk, I remember the doctors saying it was impossible. They were wrong about a lot of things." Margaret smiled, leaning into his warmth. In 2 weeks, they would marry in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Reverend Stone officiating and the whole town invited. The boys had insisted on being joint best men, a request that had made both Margaret and Caleb tear up. The territorial office had sent final confirmation last week. Updated boundary documents were officially filed, based on a comprehensive survey conducted by George Mitchell himself, who'd come out of retirement for one last job. The Hastings Ranch was legally secure, Beyond any future challenge, Edmund Cross had left the territory entirely, his reputation in ruins after word spread about his manipulation of the legal system. Several of his own ranch hands had come forward with stories of his other questionable dealings, and territorial authorities were now investigating. Margaret felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that he could no longer threaten her family. Dr. Webb had begun documenting the boy's recovery in medical journals. Other doctors had written asking for details of Caleb's techniques. Families from across the territory had sought his help with their own children facing various challenges. Caleb gave his time freely, sharing knowledge and encouraging hope. "Papa Stone!" Benjamin's voice called out. The boys had started calling Caleb that a month ago, a natural evolution that had required no discussion or formal permission. It simply felt right. Caleb walked out to meet them, his gait easy and confident. Margaret watched the three of them together, her sons and the man who'd become their father in all but blood. They were examining something in Samuel's hand, heads bent together, voices animated. Clara appeared with coffee. "Those boys have come so far. Makes an old woman believe in miracles, not miracles. Just hard work, and someone who refused to accept impossible. Call it what you want." "I call it beautiful." Clara sipped her own coffee. "Thomas would be proud, you know. Of the boys, of how you've kept this place running, of the life you're building with Caleb. I think so too. I feel him here sometimes, especially in the evenings. Not haunting, just present, approving. Of course he approves. He loved you enough to want you happy, even after he was gone." Margaret touched the locket at her throat. She'd had it modified. Now it held 4 photographs. Thomas and the boys on one side, Caleb and the boys on the other. Past and present, first love and second chance, all treasured equally. The morning passed in comfortable routine. The boys practiced their walking, gradually building endurance. Caleb worked with Morrison on spring fence repairs. Margaret managed the household accounts, pleased to see the ranch finances stabilizing now that the legal battle was behind them. At midday, a rider approached, a young man Margaret didn't recognize, dusty from travel. He dismounted and approached the porch respectfully. "Mrs. Hastings, I'm Daniel Cooper from the Territorial Office. I have something for you." He handed her an official-looking document. Margaret opened it, read quickly, and felt tears spring to her eyes. "What is it?" Caleb had returned, sensing something significant. "It's from the Territorial Governor. A formal apology for the administrative irregularities that led to the challenge against our property." And she could barely speak. "A commendation for Thomas, recognizing his contributions to developing the territory and his exemplary character as a landowner." "That's wonderful, Margaret. There's more. They're naming the creek that runs through our property Hastings Creek in Thomas's honor. It will appear on all official territorial maps." Caleb pulled her close as she cried happy tears. The young courier looked uncomfortable but pleased. "The governor wanted you to know that men like your late husband built this territory with integrity and vision. His memory deserves recognition." After the courier left, Margaret carried the document to Thomas's study. She'd finally made peace with this room, had begun using it herself for ranch business. But she'd left certain things unchanged. His coat still hung on the chair, his pipe still rested on the desk. She placed the commendation in a frame and hung it on the wall where Thomas's desk had a clear view. "You did it," she whispered. "You built something that lasts, something worthy of honor." She felt no response, no supernatural presence. But she felt peace, which was perhaps the same thing. That evening brought unexpected visitors, the family from town whose daughter used a wheelchair. The girl, perhaps 9 years old, watched the boys with desperate hope. "Could you teach us?" the father asked Caleb. "The exercises, the techniques, whatever you did for Samuel and Benjamin." Caleb knelt beside the girl's chair. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma." "Well, Emma, I can try to help. But you have to understand, every person is different. What worked for Samuel and Benjamin might not work exactly the same for you, but it might work." The hope in her voice was heartbreaking. "It might. And even if you don't walk, we might be able to help you get stronger, feel better, have more independence." Caleb looked at her parents. "I'm not a doctor. I don't have medical training. but I have experience and willingness. If you want to try, we'll try together. When can we start?" Emma asked immediately. And so it began, Caleb's informal practice helping other families, other children. He never charged for his services, accepting only whatever families could afford to give. Some brought money, some brought goods, some simply brought gratitude. The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of hope. Families traveled from distant settlements, camping on the property while Caleb worked with their children. Margaret found herself cooking for crowds, Clara managing a steady stream of visitors, the boys sharing their own experiences and encouraging other children. It was exhausting and wonderful, and exactly what Thomas would have wanted. His ranch serving a purpose beyond profit, helping build community and spreading hope. 2 weeks later, on a perfect spring morning, Margaret married Caleb Stone. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, her hair crowned with wildflowers the boys had picked. Samuel and Benjamin stood beside Caleb in their Sunday best, holding the wedding rings on small cushions Clara had embroidered. The ceremony was held in the front yard, with the mountains as backdrop and practically the entire town in attendance. Reverend Stone performed the service, his words simple and heartfelt. "We gather today not to forget what came before, but to celebrate what comes next." Thomas Hastings built a foundation of love and family. Caleb Stone has proven himself worthy to build upon that foundation. Together, Margaret and Caleb create something new while honoring what was. When it came time for the vows, Margaret spoke from her heart. "Caleb, you came into my life when I'd forgotten how to hope. You taught my sons to walk and taught me to live again. I promise to stand beside you, to love you with all my heart, and to build a future worthy of the second chance we've been given." Caleb's vows were equally heartfelt. "Margaret, you and your sons have given me a home when I'd been wandering for years. You've given me purpose and family and love I never thought I'd find again. I promise to honor Thomas's memory by protecting what he built, to love you and the boys with everything I am, and to face whatever comes together, as a family should." When Reverend Stone pronounced them husband and wife, the gathering erupted in applause. Samuel and Benjamin hugged them both, and Margaret felt her heart so full it might burst. The celebration lasted into the evening, food and music and dancing, with even the boys attempting a few careful steps to the music. Dr. Webb gave a toast about love and healing. Clara cried happy tears. Morrison and the ranch hands sang old frontier ballads as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Margaret found herself standing with her new husband, watching their sons now, play with other children in the fading light. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. For seeing possibility where everyone else saw only limitation. For loving us enough to stay. Thank you for letting me try. For trusting me with your son's care and your heart." Caleb pulled her close. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Those walking canes I made for the boys, the ones they used in court. What about them?" "I've been getting requests from other families. Children who need canes but can't afford fancy medical equipment. I was thinking maybe that could be something I do. Make canes for children who need them. Carve them special, make each one unique." Margaret looked at him with love and admiration. "That's a beautiful idea." "Thomas would approve, would he?" "I don't want to overstep, trying to change too much around here. Caleb, this ranch has always been about family and community. What you're proposing honors that." "Thomas would absolutely approve." She paused. "Besides, you're part of this family now. You're allowed to have ideas about how we serve others." As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, the celebration continued. Samuel and Benjamin, exhausted from the day's excitement, eventually fell asleep on a quilt under the stars, their new walking canes beside them, polished mountain pine with their names carved in Caleb's careful hand. Margaret looked at her family, her sons sleeping peacefully, her new husband beside her, the ranch secure and thriving, the future bright with possibility. She thought of that moment 3 months ago when Caleb had first arrived, a stranger with a walking staff and an improbable promise. She'd been so broken then, so resigned to a life of sorrow and limitation, and now look at them, her sons walked. Her home was secure. Her heart had healed and opened to new love. The impossible had become possible through patience, determination, and the courage to hope when hope seemed foolish. Caleb squeezed her hand. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about a mountain man who refused to accept impossible as an answer, who lifted my sons to their feet literally and figuratively, who brought light back into a house that had grown dark with grief. I was just passing through. Could have ridden right by, but you didn't. You stopped. You stayed. You cared." Margaret turned to face him fully. "You changed everything, Caleb Stone. We changed everything together. You, me, the boys, even Thomas in his way. It took all of us." He was right, Margaret realized. Healing wasn't something one person did to another. It was something people did together, supporting and encouraging and refusing to let each other give up. The party finally wound down near midnight. Guests departed with hugs and well-wishes. Clara and Morrison shooed Margaret and Caleb away, insisting they'd handle clean-up. The boys were carried to bed, still sleeping soundly. Margaret and Caleb stood alone on the porch under a sky full of stars. "Mrs. Stone," Caleb said, testing out the name. "Mrs. Margaret Stone," she replied. "Has a nice sound to it. What do you think Thomas would say if he could see us now?" Margaret considered carefully. "I think he'd say he's glad his family is loved and protected, that his sons are walking and thriving, that his ranch is secure and serving a greater purpose. And," she smiled, "I think he'd tell you to take good care of us, and thank you for being the man we needed. I'll do my best to earn that trust. You already have." They stood together, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built something new while honoring what came before. Around them, the ranch settled into nighttime quiet, cattle in distant fields, creek water singing its endless song, wind whispering through the pines. This was home, not because of the land or the buildings, though those mattered, but because of the love that lived here, the hope that had been rekindled, the family that had been healed and reformed and made whole. Some miracles came loudly, Margaret thought with thunder and divine intervention, but others came quietly, on the steady feet of those who never stopped believing, on the calloused hands of a mountain man who saw possibility instead of limitation, on the brave determination of two boys who refused to accept impossible as their final answer. And maybe that was the greatest miracle of all, not the dramatic transformation, but the quiet daily choice to keep trying, keep hoping. Keep believing that difficult was not the same as impossible. Margaret leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, and looked out at the land Thomas had built, and she and Caleb would now steward together. The future was unwritten. There would be challenges ahead, certainly, but they would face them as a family, strong, united, and unbreakable. "Caleb." "Yes, love?" "Welcome home." He kissed the top of her head. "Been home since the day I arrived. Just took me a while to realize it. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Below them, the earth turned toward another dawn. And in the house behind them, two boys slept peacefully, their walking canes beside their beds, symbols of the impossible made possible. Some stories end with happily ever after, neat and simple and tied with a bow. But this story ended with something better, with hope for tomorrow. With love strong enough to honor the past while embracing the future, and with the certainty that sometimes the greatest miracles are the ones we create ourselves. One patient step at a time, the mountain man had lifted the widow's paralyzed twins to their feet. But in doing so, he'd lifted an entire family from despair to hope, from brokenness to wholeness, from mere survival to truly living, and that, Margaret thought as she turned to go inside with her husband, hand in hand was the real story worth telling. Not just about walking, but about healing. Not just about one man's arrival, but about what that arrival set in motion: transformation, hope, and love powerful enough to move mountains, or at least to teach two boys to walk, which, in the end, was its own kind of mountain-moving miracle.